par and is one of those kick it out the door, we'll patch it later type things.
Wow.
It very well might meet their standards is the problem.
Yeah, and it's tough because when you own a studio and you have the ability to make sure that all the problems that modern day releases have don't happen, but you still do, right? Like we talk about Cyberpunk and how disastrous that was. That wasn't owned by anybody. That was CD Projekt Red. That was their game published on all platforms or released on all platforms, and it had all those issues. You look at a Sony game, you look at Ragnarok, you look at Horizon Forbidden West, you look at Spider-Man 2 whenever that comes out, or Spider-Man 1 even. There is a pedigree to a Sony game. When you boot it up, you know that it's probably going to be awesome, at the very least, or not have a lot of these problems that a lot of modern day games are facing. There aren't that many technical glitches. It runs well. It tells a good story. And, Sony's focusing on single-player games while Microsoft is more on the multiplayer side of things. But there still has to be that pedigree when you are a big studio a big publisher like Microsoft or a big company like Sony. You've got to have a quality control level that sets the standard for your brand. I mean, it's just, I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, and I'll be honest with you, I have been out of the Sony ecosystem for quite some time until you kind of dragged me back into it kicking and screaming when I was finally able to get hands on. And the gaming experience, first of all, the user interface on the PS5s is completely different. I played experience itself, the attention to detail, and the level of quality. Now, granted, Spider-Man had some quality issues in it.
No, you think so?
Yeah, there's a few things in there that were an issue. But for the most part, everything was cinematic in the experience that I got to play. And it made me really enjoy the experience. And when I play stuff on Xbox, it's literally just to kill time. Mm-hmm. It's not to enjoy myself, to immerse myself, or anything. So they're two very different types of styles and platforms. Mm-hmm. And they're managed very differently. That quality comes across, and it's just blatantly obvious in just starting the game up.
Yep.
And that's where the biggest contrast, I think, is to me.
Yeah, and Redfall comes out at the time when Microsoft has been sorely lacking in those first-party AAA titles, which is exactly what you talk about. Off the top of your head, you can name 3 or 4 Sony games that you've played that hit a chord with you.
Yeah.
And Microsoft just doesn't have that, and they haven't for a very long time.
Well, and I'll tell you, I'm a huge, huge Halo fan,
yep.
Okay? Not only have I loved every one of the games that came out, well, I've played every one of the games that came out.
Halo Wars 2?
I've read all the novels. I'm up to date. Yeah. I'm in the middle of reading the latest novel.
We're both huge Halo fans.
Love it, love it, love it. Halo Infinite just did not resonate with me, did not hit with me. It's ironic that the environment that you're in was so broken because it felt like the storyline and the character development and everything else was equally broken.
Yep.
Like you jump into this and you're completely disjointed. You have no idea what's going on. It was buggy. There was a number of glitches that crept up through the thing that prevented me from progressing until a patch came out. But it just didn't have that refined feel. And the fact that the terrain that you're on is literally a shattered world only reinforced. And to me, it was almost like, oh, well, they just didn't finish it. Then they decided to make it part of the storyline.
Yeah, the ring is unfinished that you're on.
Right.
Yeah.
And it literally felt like they just didn't feel like finishing the game. And so much the game was missing when it came out. I played through it. I did all the side missions, and I haven't gone back to it in months, probably a year at this point. And there's no reason for me to.
Right. Yeah, so Halo Infinite came out in 2021. Personally, I really enjoyed the campaign at launch, but Halo is always kind of a weird story to follow. If you go play all the games, like the story is not always the forefront. It's always the gameplay, and the gameplay in Infinite was good, but a lot of where the issues come in is with the multiplayer of Infinite. It had little to no multiplayer support post-launch, and it took forever to get the content updates going for that service. It took forever for that to start rolling out. And it ended up leading to Microsoft cleaning house at 343 months after the release, just because of how big of a failure it was. I still play Halo multiplayer every once in a while. I don't know why. I just really, it's still Halo at the end of the day, you know, and I still enjoy that. But it had so much potential, and everybody at the time was saying Microsoft can't mess this up, and they kind of did. Like the multiplayer at launch, everybody was on board. It's such an exciting announcement when they announced that the multiplayer was going to be free. They announced it day and date at I forget where. Very exciting, very hype around that. But as time goes on, you know, the campaign comes out and it's the semi-open world. You know, it still feels good. It still feels like Halo, but then there's just nothing. There's just nothing after it, and it's almost like they just. Like, this is Halo. This is, when you buy an Xbox, Master Chief is on the box. And it's like, how are we not dumping all of our resources into this? It blows my mind. You know, you had the thing with come out at launch. Forge was delayed. All these pieces was delayed like a year, like a long time. And again, it still comes out at launch and it's missing all these pieces. And it's like, guys, how did you not nail this? Like, it's Halo. Like, this is your one thing.
Well, and the other problem that I had with this whole thing, one, you had 2 downloads, basically. Two applications that you ran, 2 games you ran. You could either run the multiplayer or you could run the campaign. It wasn't until months later that they were even integrated into each other. So it was a completely disjointed experience. But the other problem they had here, which I think really highlights the Game Pass problem that they're running into, is it was released on Game Pass.
Yep, I was just going to mention that. Yep.
How do you expect to make money on a premier game if you're going to give it away for free on your subscription service?
Yep.
Like, even Disney Plus is smart enough not to put their movies on Disney Plus the day they come out in theaters. Now, granted, there's legal reasons for that, too. But, like, make them wait a month, 2 months, 3 months. Like, there was a point in time when you would get pre-orders so that you could get exclusive content. You would get pre-orders so you could get the higher end versions of the games. You get on all that stuff. Nowadays, what's the point of a pre-order if you're going to release it at the same time on your subscription service?
Pre-orders are also a way to project sales numbers, too.
They are. But right now, I think the thing with pre-orders is I'm willing to pre-order a game if I'm guaranteed that it's going to work on day one. That's really what I'm shooting for. If I pre-order for you, maybe you can pay the developers more to finish the game.
Yeah, which it probably isn't going to work on day one. But yeah, you bring up the issue of Games Pass, and this ties back into Redfall as well. Games Pass is still a good value, but it's worth noting that any game that comes out day one on Games Pass is already going to face tough sales numbers. Games Pass tends to cannibalize sales numbers in exchange for that wider access. And I think that's what Microsoft was banking on with Halo, is that, hey, it's on Games Pass. If you guys get Games Pass, you'll have Halo, our flagship title. You'll have it day one on your new console. And yeah, that might have worked in the short term, but in the long term, where's the money coming from, really?
Yeah.
So going back to Redfall, in just 2 weeks since its launch, Redfall has had a drastic reduction in players. And this is coming from Steam, so take it with a grain of salt. I know it's tough to compare, but Steam numbers are probably pretty accurate still. At its debut, Redfall was averaging around 6,000 players, and that figure has plummeted to around 200 players since May 16th. So that's like 2 to 3 weeks. You're losing, I don't know math, a lot of players. And it's overall, this has been a bad look for Microsoft. You know, we talked a lot about Halo, and that was another big one where it's just like, you know, Microsoft hypes up these first-party releases, and they're almost always disappointments. Especially in a time when games like Ragnarok, like we talked about, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom are dominating critically and financially for Sony and Nintendo. You know, what is Microsoft doing to make themselves stand out in, you know, I don't like console wars. I think that's stupid, but it is competitive business still. It's not, you know, we're not going to say Xbox is better than a PlayStation, but like, these are businesses that are selling products, and some businesses are selling their products, better products, and they're selling them better.
Well, and I think the real funny thing here is in doing my research ahead of time, I read one article and they talked about, from a hardware perspective, the Xbox is better hardware.
Yep.
It's more powerful hardware. But they can't get the software right. So it doesn't matter how much horsepower you throw at the problem. If the game doesn't run, it doesn't run really fast on a good
Right.
system, right? So why they need to focus less on the hardware, right? Because you have a console there that's overly powerful for the type of gaming that you need right now, which is great for future proofing it. If you've got a future, if you can't keep your premier product, I mean, Halo is the Xbox franchise.
Yep.
If you can't do that right, what are you going to do right? You own it.
Yeah.
You made it, you know? And like people are longing for the Bungie days now. Like 343 Studios was clever and it was neat and it had promise, and it hasn't delivered on that promise.
And there, I mentioned that story about Microsoft laying off a bunch of people at 343. We don't like to see people get laid off. Obviously, that's bad. But also, it blew my mind that 343 kept Halo. They didn't give it to another publisher or developer. Like, after all this, we're still going with 343. Nobody liked Halo 4 or 5.
Right.
And it's like, we're still staying with 343. Like, okay. I mean, I guess if they fired a lot of the people and able to bring new people in to give it a new voice or to make it better, I don't even know what's next for Halo. I have no idea what they're going to do. Do you think they do another mainline entry? Do you think we get I don't know. Do you have any ideas?
From a storyline standpoint, I don't think you can go much further down. I mean, granted, you've got the whole TV show now with Master Chief. That's a completely different animal.
Yeah.
But I think from a storyline standpoint in Halo, you either have to reinvent the brand itself, or you have to move on to some other storyline.
And that's what everybody thought Infinite was going to be.
Yeah.
It looked like it was going to be, we're in the age of the soft reboot sequel. That's what everybody thought Infinite was going to be. And in some ways it was, but we still kept the convoluted plot that everybody didn't like about Halo.
Right.
They should have just stripped it down to Halo 1, where it's very simple objectives, and they just didn't do that. And, they had it was like they had the setting of Halo 1, a very basic ring, but with with the still overly complicated space epic that nobody knows unless you read.
And that's the problem even with the novels right now, not to get off topic too much, but even the novels now are still sticking to this whole, we're going to fire the ring.
Yeah.
That ship has sailed already, pun intended. You need to come up with another galactic, and don't do the whole Cortana thing, because they don't even have anything in the wings waiting that they can pull from the novels that's really viable, because even the novels are getting kind of long in the tooth.
I think you got to blow the whole thing up.
I agree. I think if you're going to do it, don't just come out with a remastered edition of it. Reboot the whole thing. I'm with you there.
Yeah. So, as we wrap up this second segment, how can Microsoft anywhere near Halo in terms of mass market appeal? What is next for Microsoft? How are they going to reclaim?
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment.
Can you dump out of this? Welcome back, everyone. You have to go watch the show yourself. Welcome back and Insights into Tomorrow. This program, episode 19, we're talking Microsoft and the state of Microsoft. As we teased in the end of the last segment, what is next for Microsoft? What are they going to do? We had the disastrous release of Redfall. Microsoft has one more trick up its sleeve. Xbox and Bethesda's Starfield, set to release on September 6th of this year, allegedly. Expectations are sky high for this title. From the same studio that made Fallout and Elder Scrolls, Starfield is set to be Bethesda's deep dive into the sci-fi genre. So I'll ask you the same thing I asked you about Redfall. Did you see anything about Starfield? Do you know anything about it?
I have. Actually, a lot of folks, because I still play Star Wars The Old Republic, a lot of folks in there are really looking forward to this. This is supposed to be like the second coming of
I know.
Christ here, where it's going to be the savior to the entire game industry. And I'm like,
have we ever heard this narrative before with another sci-fi game?
Yeah, and it's like, okay, guys, let's wait and see. Give it 3 months once it's released, and we'll see where we wind up.
Yeah, I pretty much feel the same way. I've kind of followed the hype train ever since Fallout 4. I was a big Elder Scrolls. I mean, who didn't love Skyrim? Skyrim is like one of the best games ever made.
I still play it.
Yeah, me too. Fallout 4 comes out and it's not great. Fallout 76 comes out and it's even worse. It's like, okay. Now, the one thing I don't know, a lot of the reason those games feel old is because of the engine they're running on. Starfield might be on a new engine. I neglected to do the research on that. If it is, that's great, unless it's buggy and bad. But the game was recently rated 17 plus by the ESRB, with a potential ban coming in Australia for explicit drug use. But Australia bans, if there's like cigarettes in your game, they'll get it banned in Australia. But yeah, this is the big thing for Microsoft. When this was announced as an exclusive acquisition, you had Todd Howard come out. It was a big deal, and this game's been hyped for years. Do we have breaking news?
So I just looked it up real quick. Starfield is using Creative Engine 2, which was a modified version of Creative Engine, which is what Skyrim, Fallout 4, and Fallout 76 is on.
So modified is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Hopefully it's heavily modified. They've released gameplay footage of it, and it looks, I don't get it. I don't understand the hype behind this game at all. I really don't even have any interest in it. I mean,
honestly, I think everyone that I've talked to about it is looking forward to the immersion of it. It's the story. It's the size of the world that you're going to be in. I don't think anyone is looking at it for any kind of breakthrough technologically.
Oh, no.
It's just, hey, this is an escape for me, and it's going to be a big escape.
Everybody wants the Fallout 3, or Fallout New Vegas. That's my favorite. The Skyrim, where you can just walk and just get lost in this world. And hey, I hope they can do that. But personally, I have pretty much no faith in Bethesda to pull that off. And it's like, does Microsoft? Because clearly they do, right? If they decided to acquire when they acquired the studio, they make Starfield their one of their tentpole games coming out, and their only tentpole game coming out in like the next year. Do you think that this is where Microsoft should be putting their eggs in the basket?
I think this is another example of Microsoft not really doing the due diligence on acquisitions and projects. I think they were sold a good bill of things here that they could use, but I don't think they ever dug deep enough. And again, it's one of those things like, 3 years ago, we saw a trailer for this, and it looked really good. Okay, well, that trailer was basically just a movie someone put together. Yeah. There was no gameplay in it whatsoever. There was no technology demonstration in it whatsoever. I almost think that's what Microsoft saw and decided that that's the direction they want to go.
They got tricked too.
And they got tricked too. And I'm sure this wouldn't be the first time it happened to them.
Yeah. The gameplay that was released, it doesn't look that special to me personally. It looks a lot like No Man's Sky, if you ever played that game. Another notoriously poorly received game on launch. However, credit to, I forget the name of the studio, but they fixed that game. That game is playable. Tons of new free content. They're updating it every couple months. No Man's Sky, check it out if you like, space adventuring. However, I don't think that's what people want from a Bethesda game. I think they want that element of action and immersion like you talked about. And I don't know if Starfield's going to have that. I hope it does. I hope it does well. But I think it is a really, really big gamble for Microsoft. And I just don't know if it's going to pay off, even if it is successful. I don't know if it's going to repair all the ill will that's been done so far.
Well, and that's a very good point. I don't know if Microsoft has a choice. Microsoft has dug a hole so deep for themselves that they can't get out themselves. So they're hoping for something like this to kind of propel them out of that hole and put them back into the mainstream to get them to the point of some level of respectability with gamers. I think a lot of people have just lost respect. Microsoft has lost that luster. And you're right, if this doesn't work, I don't know where they're going from there.
Yeah. I mean, they've got Elder Scrolls 6, but God knows when that's coming out. 2025, maybe 2024. But like, I think it goes back to this issue of accessibility too, not in terms of if you have a handicap or something like that, but I mean, like if you're trying to get somebody into gaming, like you as an example, I was able to sell you on Ragnarok and Last of Us because they are relatively easy to pick up and play if you've played other games. Starfield as like an immersive first-person space thing, I don't know if that is as easy to sell to people as a emotional story between a father and a daughter or a father and a son that Sony can offer. I mean, I know sci-fi has a pretty general broad appeal.
Series X, even S now. Like the DirectX 12, okay? So you have direct memory access available, and that has to be encoded and decoded by the video processor. That's compressed, and then has to be uncompressed in video memory, read in, processed, rendered, and then written back out. DirectX 12 gives the video memory of the video processor direct access to system memory. So it bypasses all that, infinitely more efficient and faster than you can do it. But your engine has to be able to take advantage of DirectX 12. And if it can't, which a lot of them don't at this point in time, then you got a problem.
Yeah, it's like you future-proofed everything, but, at what cost? What are you going to do? I don't know. Bethesda games in general are known for being buggy and running poorly at release. It would be amazing if Starfield came out day one, runs great, smooth, as smooth as 30 frames can be. No buggy thing, because that was what sunk Fallout 4 and 76, was just the litany of internet videos of all the things wrong with it, and immediately you're dead in the water. It's just, I don't know, and it goes back to what is next for Microsoft if this doesn't work out. It's like, what do they have lined up? They've had some good AA games come out. Hi-Fi Rush, great game, highly recommend it. But it's these big tentpole games that Microsoft is just lacking, that I think overall is why they are, to the traditional gamer, why they are losing to Sony in these, in game to game, if we're going to compare it.
Yeah, well, and I'll tell you, if 30 frames per second is considered acceptable in this case, don't expect a lot of action.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to see anything that requires high frame rate in there. If
it's a first-person shooter.
Good luck with that.
I know, that's I don't get that. That's why in Fallout you had the Vault, or what was it, the VAC system, whatever the thing where you could stop time and target different areas. It's because Fallout is not a good shooter.
Right.
That's why you had to have auto aim as characters you meet in the world itself. It's not really supposed to be a shooter. It just happens to have guns in it. They kind of did that a little better in Fallout. But Starfield, it looks like they're really trying to do that, more of a shooter, and make it a space epic where you can explore. I forget, there was a couple months ago where there's 1 billion planets or something like that.
Right.
It's no, there's not. First off, that's not true. There's no way that's true. And it's I don't know. This feels very Cyberpunk to me, of a game that's been hyped up for years, that is going to, people are going to go into it and never want to come out, that they're going to have to be drip fed, the feeding tube, so they don't have to come out of the game. And it's how are we still in 2023 making these grand assumptions about games when the only people that can pull that off is Sony?
That's true. And unfortunately, what you're going to find is this is going to be a judgment time for Microsoft. If they can't meet expectations and they don't have anything else in the pipeline, you might start seeing those Game Pass subscriptions drop off.
Yeah, especially if the price continues to raise.
Or there's retro gaming. Everyone loves retro gaming, and that's, I think, the direction that Game Pass is going to go.
Well, they just announced the last of the backwards compatible stuff they're putting up. Yeah. So I've bought so many 360 games again on Xbox. I'm not proud of it, but I did, because they're all right there and they're easy to play. And you can get an FPS boost sometimes too, which is pretty nice.
Right.
But anyway, so that we're gonna get a Starfield Direct, I think in June or maybe sooner, giving us more information on the game. So maybe we'll get something in that is a little bit more concrete, that gets my hopes back up. Or maybe we'll get a delay. Who knows?
Well, if I had to put money on it, I'd say you're looking at 3 to 6 month delay till the next delay.
Yeah. I don't. Who knows? That'd be bad, because then they wouldn't only have Redfall this year, and that would be a real bad look. But anyway, we're going to take our last break, and when we come back, our final thoughts and a couple more words about Microsoft when we return. Or we'll be back immediately. Who's to say?
And we're back.
Welcome back, everybody.
We had to dump that last commercial. We're having some technical difficulties here today. So what are we talking about in our last segment?
Well, I had something positive down, but you had another angle you might want to go in.
Nothing overly negative, I don't think. I kind of wanted to talk about what the future of cloud gaming looks like. I mean, we talked about kind of we played around what the definition of it is. But what are your thoughts on things like Google getting out of the market? Is that a sign that, Google has a reputation for testing the waters with things and kind of hooking people in and then backing out? Do you think that's a sign of where cloud gaming is going to go?
I don't know. I think cloud gaming is a hard sell, because when it comes to gaming, you got to have a box, right? You got to have a box to plug in your TV. It's been that way since gaming was a thing, with like the Nintendo Entertainment System and stuff like that. So I think the biggest barrier for this, well, the second biggest barrier, I'll get to the first in a second, is that how does this work? You're telling me it's just a USB stick I put into my TV, which Microsoft is testing that, by the way. They're working on that, or like an app on your TV.
Right.
I think in practice it's very cool. But the biggest issue is the internet, is the infrastructure for it to be able to roll it out. I just don't think we're there yet. And, we're getting there. And I think in small scale it can work. Like the fact that I can boot up an Xbox game, an indie game that's on Games Pass on my phone. I think that's great. But I think for it to become the norm, I think we're probably 5 to, if not more, years away from that.
Well, and I agree. I think the technological limitation is sort of what we talked about earlier. Because of the type of games that they're talking about here, latency is an issue. And like when you transmit something over fiber optic, you get pretty much, with the exception of conversions on one end or the other, you get the speed of light. But we can transmit across copper, which most people tend to wind up doing. All your big networks that you're connecting to are copper networks. You're limited to about a third the speed of light with the resistance of the wire. You can't get over that. You can't overcome this. If you're bouncing it off a satellite, you're limited by the physical distance that you have between you and that satellite and back to Earth. There's no way to overcome that unless you start doing quantum entanglement at some level.
Microsoft can do it.
So I think the cloud gaming aspect is dangerous to try to go in that direction. But I'm curious how mobile gaming will go, because now we've got your Stream Deck out. Asus is now releasing
a stronger version,
PC-based version of a gaming system. You have the Nintendo Switch that's a self-contained gaming system. All these things can hook up to a TV system. Yeah. Is that the interim until we can correct the shortcomings of the networking or for cloud gaming?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, we're getting the Switch 2. People are thinking maybe 2024, 2025. The Steam Deck and what was the other one?
Asus Ally?
Yeah, it's like the stronger version of a Steam Deck, basically. Those things are cool. I had a Steam Deck for about a week before I returned it. It's just not for me. I think it depends on the kind of gamer that you are. If you're somebody that wants to boot up and play a couple matches of Call of Duty and then, you call it a night, I think cloud gaming might be able to work if they can figure out the latency. Otherwise, you're going to have the 165 gigs that Warzone takes up in your console. If you want to get that intense single-player experience, cloud gaming could work for that because it's, you don't have to worry about it as much.
Sure, yeah.
And handheld, I think, is good to, if you travel a lot. I think it depends on the consumer on base to base. But I just think overall, the box, plug it into your TV, I think that's going to have the most mass market appeal and accessibility based off internet. I just think cloud gaming is going to be a hard sell everywhere around the country and the world until we can figure out a better infrastructure for the internet.
See, and I long for the days of the LAN party when I used to pack up my gaming system and take it to a friend's house or take it into work and hook up to the network. And, that was, we were playing, I think, Quake back then. Mm-hmm. That was paradise to me. You took it with you. Wasn't quite as portable as they are now. No. But you didn't have to worry about the latency issue.
Hey, but now Halo launches and doesn't have co-op at all. So it's way better now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much going to wrap things up for today, unless you had anything else to add.
No, I think that's it.
So maybe in another year or 6 months, we'll come back with another update on this acquisition, because they're clearly going to drag it out as long as they can. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Once again, I want to plug the show notes again. The show subscriptions, rather. Make sure you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. We will be there for you. If you have any comments on today's show, you can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at insights_things. Twitch, where we are live right now. If you've got Amazon Prime, that means you have Twitch Prime. Make sure you give us that Twitch Prime sub, twitch.tv/insightsintothings. On Facebook, facebook.com/insightsintothings, at insightsintothings on Instagram. And of course, all these links can be found on our website, insightsintothings.com. Thank you all so much for listening. For Joe Whalen, for me, Sam Whalen. Have a great day, everybody.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow. This is episode 18, Artificial Intelligence. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey, everybody. You believe we've done 18 of these?
18, wow. We're on a roll.
Wow. We'll get to 100 in no time.
Yeah, we kind of have fallen off of our cadence of monthly podcasts on this, haven't we?
There's just nothing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you steer away from all the controversial topics.
Exactly.
So this week we're going to talk about a nice safe topic, and that is artificial intelligence.
No dire implications with that.
So you know how this one's going to end.
Uh-huh.
So is the future of AI more like HAL 9000, Skynet, and The Matrix? Or is it more like WALL-E, Star Trek's Commander Data, or C-3PO from Star Wars? Some of the world's most brilliant minds, like Michio Kaku and Stephen Hawking, recognize the tremendous potential for artificial intelligence, but also offer words of caution at its development. Is artificial intelligence the next step in our evolution, or the first step in our ultimate destruction? How will AI impact humans? How will AI impact what humans create? And could humans be entirely removed from the creative process? That's what we'll be discussing on today's episode of Insights into Tomorrow. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find both audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things. And we can be found anywhere you get a podcast these days: Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, etc. I would also encourage you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing, give us suggestions on what you'd like us to talk about. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Twitter at insights_things, or on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. Are we ready?
Yep, let's get into it.
Let's go. So what is artificial intelligence? So John McCarthy, head of computer science department at Stanford University in 2007, defined artificial intelligence as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs. It's related to the similar task of using computers to understand human intelligence, but AI does not have to confine itself to methods that are biologically observable.
Like a brain.
Exactly. And this is kind of a different approach to artificial intelligence than what has traditionally been the measure of artificial intelligence. And that was really something called the Turing test that was created by Alan Turing back in the 1950s. So the Turing test basically said if it's observable and convincing enough to be a human. The test basically was two people having a conversation, a third party watching that conversation, and if the third party watching that conversation, it's all text-based, can't distinguish the AI for the human, then it's passed the Turing test. So kind of a loose definition of what AI was back at the time there. So it was basically how well it could emulate a human being. But I think AI has changed significantly in that time, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have to, change what we define it as well. It's not just text based. It can do way more than that now. It's expanded, pretty exponentially since then.
So what is a modern take on on artificial intelligence.
So we have some information here from Stuart Russell, professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley, and Peter Norvig. I apologize, Peter, if I mispronounced your name there. He's the director of research for Google, published Artificial Intelligence, A Modern Approach. It became one of the leading textbooks, I believe this is Norvig's book, in the study of AI. In it, they delve into 4 potential goals or definitions of AI, which differentiates computer systems on the basis of rationality and thinking versus acting. So we have the human approach, systems that think like humans, systems that act like humans as well, and the ideal approach, systems that think rationally, and then systems that act rationally. Turing's definition would have fallen under the category of systems that act like humans. And there's a little bit more here that I'm going to keep reading. I didn't realize that was part of it. At its simplest form, artificial intelligence is a field which combines computer science and robust data sets to enable problem solving. Basically, we're making these things as a sort of extra brain to help us out. It also encompasses subfields of machine learning and deep learning, which are frequently mentioned in conjunction with artificial intelligence. These disciplines are comprised of AI algorithms, which seek to create expert systems which make predictions or classifications based on that input data.
So AI right now, some of the biggest things in AI right now probably are algorithms. You know, you have the famed Google algorithm for searches, and you know they apply it to YouTube. And is the algorithm itself that basically looks at usage patterns and what you're doing online, and then determines what else you would like? Is that considered a form of artificial intelligence?
I think it would be. I mean, it's interpreting data and then I guess projecting and it's making its own conclusions based on that data and then sort of showing you that conclusion, right? So if you click on something on Instagram and you read the page long enough and you go back to Instagram, it'll have more things like that. Or it happens to me all the time because every device is listening to you all the time. You mention a product and then 5 seconds later an ad for it pops up on your Instagram, or you text somebody about it and the same thing. So it's definitely always watching and always learning.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I think we've run into that in the house here because I've got a whole boatload of Amazon A products. I don't want to say the name because I don't want to actually activating. But that's the same sort of thing. That and Siri and what's the Android version of voice
Bixby?
Bixby, is that it? So all of these assistants are some type of artificial intelligence as well. But how intelligent are they really?
Not very.
Yeah, that's kind of like none of them are thinking on their own. They all require some level of input. Mm. They all require some source of data that they go out and get. Like if you ask the Amazon devices for information on something, they'll come back and tell you a Google contributor added this. So they don't even seem to compile their own set of knowledge. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like it's more of an interface to the web than it is really an artificial intelligence. It might be an intelligent way to interface with it, but we're not talking HAL 9000.
Right, it's not learning and adapting necessarily.
Right, and it can't take its own actions or anything like that. You know, when we get into stuff like that, we might be looking at something like a Tesla or a self-driving car, where it takes input from outside sensors and has the ability to make decisions on its own at that point in time.
Right.
That's where we tend to get a little bit more down the rabbit hole of how dangerous things could be.
Yeah, once you start getting into the territory, we transition out of this into our next segment of more developed intelligence, of where that could possibly go once something starts thinking for itself.
Right. So let's take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll dig a little bit deeper into the types of artificial intelligence that are out there. We'll be right back. For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com. Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow. We are talking artificial intelligence today. So and I don't want to go through every line that we have here, just kind of throw a few things out there. So the types of artificial intelligence that we're really kind of referring to here can be broken into two categories. One's capabilities and the other's functionalities. So under your capabilities, you've got narrow AI. And an example of narrow AI is sort of like what we talked about with Siri, where it's also referred to as weak AI. It focuses on a narrow task. You can even classify IBM's Watson that was used for chess playing in something like this as well. It's not robust. It's not thinking on its own. You then get into your general AIs, and your general AIs tend to be a little bit more sophisticated. These are your strong AIs. You can understand and learn intellectual tasks that humans can do. So you're getting a little bit smarter with these, but the requirements from a hardware standpoint, you need a supercomputer. The couple that are listed here are two of the fastest supercomputers in the world in order to accomplish this.
Yeah, and do we know what we have the Fujitsu K, do you know what those are used for? Like what type of computing we're using these like intense supercomputers for?
Most of these are being used for simulating weather, simulating nuclear explosions without actually having to fire them off. So
Oh, that's helpful.
they're highly complicated and powerful devices just to get this next level of AI. Mm-hmm. And then the last level of AI from a capability standpoint is what's referred to as super AI. This is where AI, this is your Skynet. This is where it surpasses human intelligence. None exist at this point in time, thankfully. But is this the direction that we're going as we're seeing this natural progression? Are we going to see super AIs?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I want that. And then you get into like the Blade Runner discussion of like what makes something human? When you give something a will of its own, like what we're getting to like deep sci-fi territory here, but I don't know if we would ever get to that point. If what would we need something like that for? I mean, maybe to like run a city, like monitor trains and public works and stuff like that on like a city level. I don't know what we ever need something that smart for, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly see from an infrastructure standpoint, most of what we do now, you've got positive train controls, a great example you just mentioned with trains, where if the human operator fails to make certain checks, the computer can kick in and run things safely or shut the system down safely. So there's lesser versions of that now, but I think seeing something like that on a grand scale might be something where a super AI would work. What about functionality-based AIs? Tell us about that.
So we've got the reactive machine. Reactive machine is the primary form of AI that does not store memories or use past experiences to determine future actions. It only works in the present. So an example of this would be IBM's Deep Blue chess playing computer. That thing's really cool, by the way. Yeah. I've seen some videos of that. It's really neat.
Gary Kasparov would differ.
We've also got limited memory AI, which trains from the past to make decisions. They do have a memory, but it's very short-lived. And an example of this would be used in self-driving vehicles, like we mentioned, Teslas, things like that. And then finally, we have theory of the mind. On this show, we like to say theater of the mind. It's kind of like that. Theory of the mind AI represents an advanced class of technology and exists only as a concept. They would require a thorough understanding of the people and the things within an environment, including understanding feelings and behaviors. There's no examples because they don't exist, but attempts at mimicking human emotion in automatons is as close as we can get.
One of the things regarding that is that people are trying to experiment with this, and they're doing it through the same type of training that they're using for Chat GPT and the other AI engines that are out there. We'll talk more about those in a little bit. But what they're doing is they're having human beings emulate emotions, facial expressions of emotions, sadness, happiness, that type of thing. And they're having multiple iterations of people doing these. They're sticking them in a database, and then they're having a computer look at these and interpret them. So just by facial expressions, they're trying to get computers to understand emotions. How effective do you think that would be? How effective would it be for you to have no other communication method whatsoever, but just be able to see someone's face? Do you think that they would be able to convey emotions accurately enough?
I don't know. It would depend on how they're measuring it, right? Like if you're looking at like specific muscle movements for like a frown versus a smile, but everybody expresses emotion in different ways. So you'd have to have some kind of baseline to do that. And I forget the name of it. We learned it in college, but it's that thing where you show us an image of a guy's face, and it's that effect where you can interpret it however you want. Like it's the same face over and over again, but if you interpret it as in he's happy, you can kind of see it, or he's sad, you can kind of see it. And so I wonder where you get into something like that, where it's like it's sort of a gray area of, well, is this person really happy? You know, that's when you have to go back to the baseline of if we're measuring facial tics or
Right.
a certain, I don't know, visual ratios on your face.
Yeah, and I agree. And like I don't know if I as a person who doesn't need artificial intelligence would be able to accurately understand emotions.
Right.
And then I look at the technology that we've had with facial recognition already and some of the challenges we've had where you had, for instance, Microsoft's camera technology that they had on their Xbox series. When that came out, not that many years ago, they only used Caucasian people to train it. And as people with darker skin, Asians, African Americans, and so forth, started using it, the technology didn't hold up.
Right.
And it was because of the way that the technology itself was developed and trained and
The foundation of it.
exactly. So it's like, if you can't get that right, then I have a very difficult time thinking you're going to get emotions.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You get into like user error at that point. If you're trying to emulate human behavior, but you don't account for the whole world, how are we going to apply this in any
Right.
practical sense?
Right. And that's why you'd almost have to think you need multiple forms of input, voice inflection, body movement, you know, the micro tics that people have. I could certainly see you coming up with enough data points that you could infer what emotions are. But you need to have those data points there, and it has to be more sensors than just trying to read someone's face.
Yeah, and do we need this? Why would we need this?
Right. And that's another point. You know, one of the implementations that people have talked about with this is customer service. You know, they had the one hotel in Tokyo that didn't last very long, that the front desk was entirely run by automaton.
I'm sure that was a blast.
And it was because they thought the automatons would interact better with people than people would, which I'm not really sure why you would think that. But the problem you run into is you get into that uncanny valley scenario where people are just creeped out by it. It looks enough like a human to make you think it is, but not enough to know it is. So it made people feel very uncomfortable. But I could see in a situation like that where you're implementing emotional stuff, detection, where you want to know if someone's angry. You know, do I really need to get a manager? Are you like stuff like that where you're interacting with
I could see that.
It's funny that they're exploring that path now when you have grocery stores that are doing away with their self-checkout because people dislike not having a human to deal with at a register now. So it's like, I don't know if it's a cultural thing, if it's a regional thing or what, but it seems people are kind of finicky.
Yeah, I don't know. And also, it's like, is it cost effective to build a robot to talk to people than to just hire someone for minimum wage to work at the front desk?
Right. That's a
And
very good
I know
point.
the argument is that, well, the robot could do it for forever, whereas we have to worry about this person, you know, their livelihood, and, you know, they need to go to the bathroom, take a break, things like that. Robots don't have to do that. But it's like, I mean, come on.
You don't have to contribute to a 401k with robots either.
Exactly. Yeah, you just got to swap out a few parts every once in a while.
Right.
So I don't know. And the practicality is where I get hung up on of how are we really going to use these things, and are they going to be worth the effort and time we're putting in to try to figure it out.
I agree, and I think it's almost like it's a fun school project people are working on. But the golden ring, or the prize of artificial intelligence, at least as far as sci-fi tells us, is self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Self-awareness is where the AI, they only exist hypothetically right now, and only in science fiction for the most part.
Yeah.
But these are the types of systems that can understand internal traits and states and conditions and perceive human emotions. And these machines are smarter than the human mind, which is really what's terrifying, I think, to a lot of people. They'll be able to understand and evoke emotions in those it interacts with, but it'll also have its own emotions, its needs, its beliefs. This is where we get into things like a HAL 9000 from 2001 or Skynet or something like that. I don't know if anyone's shooting for self-awareness. Is self-awareness possible with today's technology?
I was actually just thinking about that because, you have in here about it having its own emotions and needs, and I think it would be more terrifying if it didn't have emotions, if it was purely logical, right? Because, you make a AI and it instantly determines that humans are bad for the planet and decides to wipe us out.
Right.
Because, we could make that conclusion, but we're also, we are humans. We're not going to wipe ourselves out, intentionally. So it's I don't know if we would get to the point where that's possible. I don't know. I obviously don't know anything about programming, but how would we program emotion? I guess, you're seeing the baby steps with this facial recognition software, but at what point are we able to program emotions? Is it something like using a human brain as the blueprint? I have no idea where this would go, but it sounds like fantasy, but one that is close enough to reality that, maybe, but I just don't know how they would do it.
And you make a very valid point there. I think humans in general have a very difficult time dealing with emotions, recognizing emotions, and coping with them already. I don't know how you would possibly translate that into software.
No, I think it would have to be, you can't, it's all math based, right? So you can't, that's the whole point of emotion. You can't quantify it, right?
Right.
Unless you measure heart rate, I guess, if you're angry or sweating or, biological reactions. But when it gets to the thinking about interpreting emotions, I just think it's too nebulous. And if we did have a self-aware AI, it would have to be, maybe based off of personality, or it would just be purely logical.
So then we're talking something more along the lines of RoboCop, where we take the ex-con and we stick his brain into the robot there, and that's the artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I was thinking that, or in Halo, if you guys are familiar with that, they use a human brain to then make an AI.
Right.
So the AI is part human, kind of. Something like that, but I don't think we can do that yet, and I don't know how we would.
And you know what? I think that's probably the biggest limiting factor right now, I think, is our computing power.
Yep.
In order to produce the amount of computational power that the human brain has, you need the fastest supercomputer right now to even approach it. And I think until we get to, real practical quantum computing, I don't think we have much of a hope of even reproducing that. People, I think, don't understand how remarkably capable the human brain is.
A lot going on.
Yeah, how fast it operates, how many different things it can do at one time. And computers just haven't gotten to that point yet. Yes, computers are very good at doing the same thing over and over again. And they're very good at doing math. But they're only that good because humans make them that good.
Yeah, and it's when you get that line of where what we're creating is superseding us, that it's okay, well, maybe we've gone a little bit too far.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point where we can take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about, is artificial intelligence dangerous in its current form and future forms? We'll be right back.
For 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
So Elon Musk, wrote, "The pace of progress in artificial intelligence," he says, I'm not referring to narrow AI, "is incredibly fast. Unless you have direct exposure to groups like DeepMind, you have no idea how fast. It's growing at a pace close to exponential. The risk of something seriously dangerous happening is in the next 5-year time frame, 10 years at most."
Where was this quote from?
So this was from Elon Musk. I didn't see
Okay.
where the quote.
I just wanted to see if we were still in the window or not.
I didn't get a date on that, but I have to imagine we're pretty close to that window.
Any day now, the robot uprising is going to happen.
Well, the fact that he made cars that are self-driving and running people over and killing them tells me right now that AI actually physically is dangerous.
He can make himself sound smarter by just becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So, what do you think of that? I mean, I think there's a lot of scholars, there's a lot of scientists that talk about AI. Elon Musk is a guy who's neck deep in it. He's building them. He's releasing them. You see what we do. SpaceX has rockets that fly back to Earth and land themselves. Tesla has cars that can drive themselves and park themselves and stuff. So that's real practical AI that's in the world now. How serious do you think you take this kind of warning from Elon Musk?
Not that seriously. Just because I don't see any like real world application of this idea, right? I also don't know what DeepMind is, but it sounds very scary. But I just don't think. I don't know. I feel like we would be seeing more examples of it other than the Teslas running people over and causing traffic. But that's just faulty hardware. That's not necessarily, the AI thinking for itself and choosing to kill all humans. That's a functionality issue, right? So I don't know. I don't think it would be this quick. I just think we would see more implementation of AI in our day-to-day lives for it to then turn into something dangerous. The most I could see it being is like an over-reliance on computers and AI instead, and when then they malfunction, then you have problems like the recent airport, the FAA systems went down, things like that, things where we have large-scale operations being run by AI, and then the AIs break, and then we have a problem.
So Musk was quoted in a separate quote comparing AI to the dangers of the dictator of North Korea. Now, yes, it's Elon Musk, so there's a lot of
Take it with a big old grain of salt.
there's a lot of self-promoting, angles that he goes through here. But we've got artificial intelligence in machines that are capable of killing people. Not designed to, but capable.
Right.
We also have it designed into devices that are designed to kill people. You've got Predator drones that are AI driven. You've got Tomahawk cruise missiles that are AI driven. You've got Phalanx Sea-Wiz close-in war weapon systems on ships that are AI driven. These are machines that are built already to kill and are powered by AI. Are those potentially dangerous, or do you think we have enough control over those?
Well, I mean, they're weapons, right? So they're inherently dangerous. It would be more about, again, I just think, are we shooting for the notion of them like rising up and like actively trying to kill people? Because I think it would be much more realistic for them to just be taken over by another human, right? To have somebody hack into them or to have them malfunction and and instead of targeting here, you're targeting somewhere else where you're not supposed to. I just don't think it would be the AI necessarily choosing to kill a bunch of people. I think instead it would be a malfunction.
So to paraphrase, we're hoping that it's humans that are the problem,
Right.
and not the AI that's
Exactly.
the problem.
And we can count on that.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that logic makes sense, because you can count on that human factor. Like, it's very likely that you would have a foreign entity attack our infrastructure here before I think you would have an AI go rogue and shut down the power grid.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, you're not gonna, like, you talked about the Predator missiles. Like, the Predator missile's not gonna wake up one day and go, "Hey, I'm gonna go blow up that town." Someone's gonna have to tell it to go do that. It doesn't. We're not at the point where these things can actively, pursue missions or pursue goals on their own unless they're told to by somebody else, like an operator.
So, all right, let's run with that for a second. So they're not going to rise up. You're not going to have a Skynet take over the world and nuke the entire world. But you have machines that are trusted to go do a job that may involve violence. If those machines can then be usurped by a nefarious third party, and our trust in those machines allows them to continue to do their job, when they get usurped, we have a new target designation.
Right, exactly. And that's I think where you get into the real world danger of this. But I mean, that's our world in general has a heavy reliance on computers, right? And so I think that comes with the risk, right, of the ease of use and the scale of our operations. You need something like AI to run it, because it's not feasible for people to do it all the time. And I think that just comes with the territory of, if this is how we're going to run things, then there's a chance that someone could take it over. It's no different than, well, it's different, but we're reducing a little bit. But if you had a gun and someone took your gun and killed you with it, it's the same thing.
So AI is the tool.
Yeah.
It's not the intent.
For now, yeah.
Okay.
Until we get to the point where, we have a fleet of drones that are, flying around the globe just taking pot shots wherever they want, that are programmed. Well, I guess they wouldn't be programmed at that point. But I'm saying, like, instead of a fleet of jets flown by pilots, if it was a fully automated, a bunch of drones where they could all communicate and make their own decisions, once they get into that level of autonomy, that's when you're running into more of an AI-based issue, I think.
So Russia's president, Vladimir Putin,
We're getting all the banner people out here today.
He said at one point in time, artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with enormous opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world.
That's a little extreme.
First off, do you agree with that?
I mean, I guess, because at that point, wouldn't you just have the strongest army too? If it's, he says it's got enormous opportunity, right? So then by that logic, you would, unless those unpredictable threats make it worse for you. I don't know. I don't think it's any different than having the strongest standing army, right? Whoever has that, you're by default the most powerful, unless you control the economy. That's different. But in terms of military force, if you have a bigger or more effective army, yeah, you're going to be more powerful, right?
So, do you think that in order to combat nations, assuming Russia's gearing up towards artificial intelligence, do you think the only way to combat nations like that is with your own artificial intelligence?
I think so. I mean, that's how these things usually go, right? Like an AI arms race, which, hey, sci-fi authors out there, that's a free title. But, yeah, I just think it's going to... And you're going to dig yourself into a hole, right? Because the more we go into this AI route, the more you're getting into these threats that are difficult to predict, like he's talking about. So the further we go with this technology, the more we're getting on that edge of accidentally making something that could either get its own intelligence or something that is more likely to be, like you said, usurped and used against the, whatever country's making it.
Okay. Now we're talking AI in actual active weapons there, but there's potential danger elsewhere too. What about social manipulation? What do you think AI could do from a social manipulation standpoint? I mean, so far we've had social media, I don't want to say usurped because it's being used as it's designed.
Right.
But you've had situations where you've got Facebook and the whole Cambridge Analytics, and you've got Twitter trying to, all the Twitter files coming out now telling us how people try to manipulate elections and stuff. Where do you think AI falls in there? Is AI, is that algorithm as you go through your social feed? Is that AI manipulating you in such a way that it could be dangerous?
Absolutely. And I think that this is where you get into the things that are much more real world dangers, right? Especially when it comes to things like social media, you run into that echo chamber issue where you're only hearing ideas and things that reinforce what you think. So you never hear anybody else's ideas, for better or worse. But generally, I think that's a bad thing. I think that you should be able to, see ideas from everybody and then interpret them how you want. But when you get into this with social media where you're seeing the same things over and over again, it just reinforces your own beliefs and makes you double down. And it makes everybody closed-minded and more isolated from each other and more extreme in their beliefs, too, in certain situations. So I think when you're getting into things like that, and like you said, the Cambridge Analytica thing where it's straight-up manipulation of people, I think when those have real-world consequences, which they did and still do, I think that's much more dangerous than worrying about a drone going rogue or something like that.
Well, surely manipulating the mindset of common citizens isn't something that's unique to AI. I mean, you had the Nazi Germany had an entire propaganda ministry that was designed to do that. You've had this type of thing that was driven by humans for hundreds of years now. What does AI bring to the plate that makes it any more dangerous than just humans doing this type of activity?
I think it's the scale and the pace of it, right? So AI is very good at learning. That's what it does, or at least whatever. I'm talking about the algorithm in social media.
Right.
It's good at learning what you do, what you look at, and I think it can do it at a pace and with an effectiveness that humans just can't do, or can't do as fast, or on such a big of a scale. I mean, a human could look at what you do on Twitter, what you click on, what you like, but it would take them much longer to figure out, okay, well, what should I serve them next in their timeline that they'll click on, versus an AI looking at it and figuring it out like that. So I think it just makes it more effective and efficient, honestly.
That's a very good point. So the other one that they talk about is invasion of privacy and social grading. I don't know if we've never really talked about social grading in the past here. It's being done in some Asian countries already, where depending on what your reputation in social media is how you're treated in society. But I've seen this in sci-fi as well, where it's extremely emphasized in how people treat you. But from an invasion of privacy, you brought up a very good point of, well, everything's listening, and if I say something, I start getting advertisements. Is that a bad thing that you get targeted advertising?
I think it depends on how you look at it. I know people that feel like they're being manipulated. They'd rather it be not targeted and just give me what I want.
Well, that's what targeted advertising is they give you what they think you want. Without targeted advertising, you're just going to get a bunch of crap thrown at you there. I mean, is that really a bad thing that you get targeted advertising?
I think when you, the people that have issues with it, I think they see it as of being manipulated, that even if it's something I want.
Well, advertising is manipulative.
It's true, which is why it's so effective.
That's the definition of advertising.
I know. I just think it's I think people have an issue with it because it's that invasion of privacy of, even in my own home, I'm being sampled for data and it's being regurgitated back at me so I can become a better consumer. Eventually it just feels like it's all boiling down to you just pumping money into the economy.
Okay, I'll buy that.
It is effective though if you're a business owner.
Absolutely.
From a capitalist standpoint, it's great.
Yeah, exactly. One of the other ones they talk about is misalignment between our goals and the machines. And this one, I don't know how much of a problem this was. The great example they give is you get into a self-driving cab and you say, get me to the airport as quickly as possible. Okay. But if the machine itself is doing what it thinks you've asked it to do, that could involve exceeding the speed limit. It could involve dangerous driving. It could involve driving into the river that's between you and the airport to try to get you there. I think this is kind of a silly
Yeah.
example of, I mean, this is no different than people following their GPSs off the road, you know. Is this something we need to worry about where if we're putting our lives in the hands of these machines at some point in time, and you know, they're already talking about having air taxis to the airport and stuff like that. So you're ramping up the level of complexity and the level of danger associated with the reliance on these machines. Is it possible that somebody misses a line of code that says stop at stop signs? Is that a danger?
I mean, not really, right? If these things are being put out on a global scale, surely they would test them, right, and see if that's an issue. You've had some issues with this with self-driving cars where they have malfunctions, where they'll, you know, I saw one the other day where a Tesla was in like a tunnel and just stopped, and I don't know why, and then like 8 cars hit it. So things like that will happen, but I think if you're talking about like the foundation of the code getting out there, that's something's wrong with it, I don't really think you have to worry about that. I feel like it would be extremely irresponsible of whatever company is making it to put it out there, not having it be fully vetted, especially when you're getting into like transportation and things like that.
There was one example of a Tesla that was driving on a highway at high speed, which they supposedly excel at. They're very good at that because that's how the sensors work best and the computer works best and everything.
Going fast?
On a highway
Oh, okay.
situation where they're not doing stop and go traffic a lot. And what happened was there was a vehicle that was in the left lane that this thing was driving in, and it wasn't expecting a vehicle. It wasn't expecting a stationary target. And because they use LiDAR and they use radar, and they'll gauge the distance between themselves and the next machine. And the assumption is that machine's going to be moving so we can make calculations based on timing. And what happened was this vehicle was stopped in the left-hand lane. The device, the smart car, saw that the machine was there. But because it wasn't moving, it assumed that it was a glitch in the sensor, never tried to hit the brakes, and literally accelerated right through the vehicle. And it did everything it was supposed to do based on the rules that it had. And someone had missed a rule that said, hey, there's a chance that something could be stopped in your lane. You have to stop for it.
Yep.
And that got out there after all this extensive testing. That still got out there into production. So there's a chance that you can get code that's broken out there.
That's true.
How do you deal with that? Who's liable at that point in time?
I mean, probably the company still, right? I mean, it's still their self-driving car that rammed into it. I think the onus is still on them. Even if it's something that they could never predict, then don't make the technology. If there's a chance that something like this could happen, then maybe it's just not meant to be. Or we just go through the trial and error of, you know, potentially people losing their lives until we figure it out and put out enough software updates, if you want to look at it in like a morbid sense. But I mean, there's things
that could be a high attrition rate.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I just think maybe at a certain point, if the body count gets high enough before you hit version 4.0, maybe we just don't do it. Maybe we just stick to driving ourselves around, or we limit it to, you know, certain public transportation options instead of every consumer having their own self-driving car.
And that's certainly a consideration to solve some of these things. And the last danger I wanted to talk about was discrimination. You know, we had already kind of talked about this to a certain extent with
The social grading.
And with the malfunction of the Microsoft camera system for minorities. How do you think this would have an impact on society itself from a discrimination standpoint? Either facial recognition AI. We had one situation very recently in our area here where somebody was arrested and held for, I think, 48 hours based on facial recognition that was completely wrong. So it's already happening. Is that a danger that we need to be aware of? Is there checks and balances that can be put in place? Should we not be relying on AI for this type of thing?
I mean, yeah, no, we should not be. If this is gonna happen, yeah. I mean, sure, there's mix up with, you know, people getting held when they're not supposed to, and that's an issue for another day of, you know, the justice system and things like that. But I think that when it comes to things like this, where you're affecting people's lives, you should probably have a double check system or like a backup to be like, okay, well, the robot figured it out, but let's just use our own eyes and see if this is the guy.
Well, and I see something like this being used extensively in high traffic areas, airports, right? So you want to be safe going through the airport, but you want to be expeditious in moving people through. So a lot of things that we do, we rely on technology to accomplish that. If you get a certain failure rate of that system itself, is that tolerable, or should that be 100% accurate?
That's a good question. I mean, if you're going to be the 99% effective and you get that 1%, there still needs to be a human element so that person isn't held for 3 days because they got the wrong person. Like there needs to be, if someone gets pulled up on facial recognition, someone needs to look at it and have that person come and I'm just saying there needs to still be a human element. We can't let it totally be run by the machines if they're not going to be 100% accurate.
So you need a path of resolution
Yeah.
as human involved. And I have my own story. There was about 2-3 years ago, I got a ticket in the mail for a vehicle that I didn't even own. And it came back as a red light camera somewhere in North Jersey, which I knew I'd never even been to the town. It was like Amboy or something like that. So they send it with a picture, and you look at the picture, and there's a link to the video for it, and you look at the video, and it had, 5 characters, 6 characters on a license plate? It had all the characters on a license plate that I hadn't had of the vehicle in 20 years. And that plate was originally registered to me, but there was a glitch either on the camera or on the plate. You couldn't read one of the digits in the middle. So the AI just assumed that it was my plate, generates a ticket, and sends the ticket out to me, and I get an order to appear in court. That's AI-driven problems that you have that should have been looked at by a human being, but because of the number of tickets that they produce, you can't. The whole point of having an automated system is because you can't have a human looking at all these things. However, to your point, I was able to call them up, explain to them what it was. They were able to resolve the ticket on the phone, and I didn't have to go for the court appearance. So that system at least had that path to resolution, whereas I think as long as we have that in place, we're safe.
The online game Star Wars, The Old Republic. Star Wars, The Old Republic. Hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Tomorrow, and thank you to today's sponsor, the Second Sith Empire.
Really paid for all that airtime, huh?
They are an awesome guild. I recommend everyone look them up. Anyway, moving right along.
Hit it one more time.
Anyway, so let's look at what the impact of AI on the world today. So some quick figures I dug up here from simplylearn.com. So the revenue from artificial intelligence software market worldwide is expected to reach $126 billion by 2025. That's significant. Not huge, but significant. Gartner predicts 37% of organizations have implemented AI in some form.
I thought they'd be higher.
I would have too. The percentage of enterprises employing AI grew 270% over the last 4 years. And according to Servion Global Solutions, by 2025, 95% of customer interactions will be powered by AI.
So we got 2 years to figure that out.
That's right. And a recent 2020 report from Statista reveals the global AI software market is expected to grow approximately 54% year over year and is expected to reach a forecast size of 22.6 billion, which doesn't really make sense because the other one was 126.
Sure does. Hey man, data's weird. They all got different conclusions.
it's numbers, right?
Don't worry about it.
I think the conclusion here is that AI is very much embedded in our lives now. Are we better off for that, or are we worse off for that?
Oh, that's a good question. We've looked at like every aspect of AI, and I think it's good in some aspects, right? We're taking the load off of humans if we can run things with an AI just to make our lives a little bit easier. I think that's a good thing because at a certain point, when we're talking about things on a global scale, it's just not practical to expect humans to be able to run all that 24/7. But then when you get into the more dangerous aspects of social manipulation, we're about to get into the discussion of how it affects creative endeavors. I think that's when you start getting into the dangerous territory, and it's really going to be a question of where does this go in the next 5 to 10 years? Are we getting that full on AI integration in every day of our lives, or is it still like it is now, where it's more in the background? It's not necessarily as prominent.
And I agree. I think we're very, very much on the cusp of something significant here. I think we're kind of nipping around the edges right now until we get deeper into it. Some of the special projects that I did want to talk about, one that's in the news now, is ChatGPT. Their tagline is optimizing language models for dialogue. And this is a chatbot that is human-like interactions. You can ask it things, it'll answer them. One of the things, this happens to actually be something that I had directed my developers at the office to dig into a little bit. One of the functions that I see with this is helping to automate and personalize communication for our sales force. So the concept that we had come up with a few years back, and the technology wasn't there yet, was our salespeople know their customers. So the salespeople can go in and drop in notes. Tom likes the Phillies. His wife's name is this. His kids' names are this, and they're going to these college. They can put in this metadata about the person. And eventually, the idea was to have this technology that could take this metadata and write a monthly email to each one of your customers that's personalized, that might have specific information as far as offers that we might have, but it looks like it's coming from you. And we want to write these, hand them off to the salesperson, let the salesperson read it and okay it, and then send it out. And we're literally within months of being able to have the system start writing emails like that. Is that, in your opinion, is that a viable, good way of using AI, or are we stealing some of the human element there? Are we muddying the waters?
I mean, it depends on how much you care about these handwritten or emails, these personalized emails. If you're okay sacrificing the human element of it, then it's fine. It still has the human element, right? The salespeople still have to know their customers. They still have to know
exactly
the things that make it personal, and they still okay before it's sent off. I think that's fine. Yeah, I don't really have any issues with that.
But if I have a salesperson who doesn't compose emails very well, is it ethical for them to use this system to compose their emails for them, or is it the same as having an assistant doing it for you, or is it different because it's AI?
That's a good question. It's like cheating on homework, kind of.
Right.
But I mean, in the real world, you're not like, I don't know. It's cheating on homework in the real world isn't as big of a deal as it is in high school. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to make these sales, right? So if you're not good at writing emails, first off, I don't know how far you would have gotten as a salesperson. But second, it's like a tool. I think in this instance, it's like another tool to use. If emails aren't your thing, but when you're in one-on-one interactions, you can make the sale. Good for you. You can use this as a tool. If you are relying on this to do your job for you, that's a little bit different, right? If you're relying on it to make sales pitches for you and to reach out to customers, and you're kind of just sitting back and maybe putting in a few inputs, then you're relying on it too much, and it's becoming an issue because you're not doing the work.
So it's just a matter of pacing how much you use the tool.
Yeah, and implementation.
So the next one I wanted to talk about was Canva. So Canva is a AI-based image generating software out there, and there's a number of them out there now. And you basically give it text input and say, give me a picture done up like Van Gogh of a horse in a rainbow. And it'll go out there and it'll source thousands of different images and it'll come back and it'll generate what's considered an original image for you, so you don't have to make it yourself. But that image itself is a compilation of all these other works. Is that something that is going too far, or are there any moral implications to that we have to worry about?
Yeah, this is actually the whole reason I wanted to do this episode was things like this. I know we covered the doom and gloom of AI taking over the world, but this is where I think it really is. It strikes a chord with me of it's essentially making like art sausage, but like if you didn't make any of the components of the sausage to begin with, you kind of just put it in the blender and called it your own. It's really devaluing art and the human element of it. And when people feel that they can get this app and make art like with no effort, it kind of defeats the purpose of it in general. There's also Lensa, which is similar to it. And I had an article linked here where there was cases where you could see artist signatures on the final product what Lensa would create because it was just stealing artwork from other people. And that's how a lot of these AI work, is that you put in what you want and it scours the internet and will take from other artists' pages, usually without permission. It just kind of steals it and then, incorporates it back into itself and spits it out for you, but you feel like you've made this and you really haven't. You didn't do any, you don't know how to do digital art or anything like that. It's like putting it on easy mode, but also the bigger thing is stealing from the people that did make something. And I really think it's an issue.
So let me ask you something, and we'll kind of go down the moral path here. If I don't have any artistic ability whatsoever, but I need to come up with a picture, and let's say I need a picture of a tree, and I don't know how to make a picture of a tree. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to look at other people's samples, and I'm going to find one that I really, really like. And then I go and I kind of try to recreate that as my image of a tree. Is that the same moral ambiguity as what a Canva is doing? Because Canva had the same problem. They wound up getting sued by Getty Images.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Because they weren't even pulling the watermarks out.
Oh,
It was so bad. Is me using someone else's inspiration to make my own different than these AIs going out there and grabbing these? Because they don't always take a one-to-one image. They may take portions of an image, almost like sampling a track in music, and then they assemble it together from multiple different sources. What's the difference in the two of those?
Well, I think, in your example, I'm assuming you're like drawing it yourself.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. That's the thing. That's where I think the line is. With the AI generated art, you're just typing in what you want and it just appears, and it's compiled from other images. With the inspiration, you are taking inspiration from that thing that somebody else made and then making your own interpretation of it. Even if it's not very good, you still put in the time and the work to make it something original, even if it's inspired by something else. Like you said, with sampling music, you can take a sample from another song that somebody else made, but then you incorporate that section of it and you make a whole new thing out of it. It's its own thing, even if it's borrowing from something else. And I think that's kind of where the line is drawn.
That's a good point. The other thing with Lensa is Lensa has one of the big functions Lensa adds is what they call their magic correction. So you take a picture of someone, you run it through the Lensa filtering. You have the filters with Snapchat and stuff like that can make the googly eyes and all that crazy stuff that you can do. Is the AI that's doing that different, or do you take exception to that from a creative standpoint when it's taking your art and enhancing it because maybe you don't have the technical capabilities to do that?
I mean, that's a good question. It's similar to, photoshopping an image, right? Or using a filter on Instagram, where it's not authentically the thing, but it's, I don't know. As long as you still made it from the beginning, I think it's a little bit better than just straight up stealing the art. But I still think it's messing with the authenticity of it, right? And it gets into our perception of what is made by humans and what is made by AI, and what does that mean for art if we can't tell the difference. And I think that's sort of the road we're going down at this point. When it gets into the enhancement, it's not as bad. It's still not great.
Well, and I'll counter that and say if you can't tell the difference between whether it's man-made or machine-made, isn't that really the ultimate goal of AI at that point, is to make it indistinguishable from human hands?
Well, that's the scary part, right? Because if you can't tell the difference, but it still stole a bunch of other people's art, then it is actively devaluing all the art that it just stole from, even if you can't tell the difference. Even if you don't know that it took from, 10 other artists to make this, it still happened, right? And it's still, even if it's indistinguishable, the consequences of it are still real.
So the dilemma that you're referring to here is more the sourcing of where it gets its material from, rather than the generation of that material.
Right, because it's not magic, right? Like the AI is not making, it's not like physically drawing it, I mean, but it's not necessarily entirely originally from the mind of the AI. It's taking from other people to make it, and that's kind of where the issue is.
So it's just creative copying.
Yeah.
So all right, let me ask you this. If you were an artist and you had a vast portfolio of your own artwork and you use that solely to power your AI, and you decided that you're going to recreate your art in the AI style, is that legitimate?
Yeah, as long as it's only taken from your stuff. Like if that's things that you made that are, I'm not going to get into the legal aspect of it. I'm not a lawyer, but if you can guarantee that it's only pulling from your art and you are totally signing off on it, then yeah, that's fine. It gets into it when it's taking other people's art without their consent or knowledge.
So, all right, being a Star Wars fan and a Eagles fan, let me throw a couple examples of non-AI out there where both of those entities have taken what they've had, they've modified those and regurgitated it back out to the public strictly for money purposes. There wasn't anything to enhance the art. There wasn't anything to make it better or different or really anything. It was literally, I just want more money, so I'm going to re-release it. Do you have a moral issue with that, with people basically exploiting their own material for money there, trying to, I'm going to say, con people out of buying it again, because I'm one of those idiots who does it.
I was going to say, yeah. Not really, no. I mean, morally, yeah, it's not ideal, right? Like, you shouldn't be scamming people, but these things have value, and there's a reason that, they're getting the money that they are. They wouldn't be re-releasing if they weren't making money. But it's not like fundamentally impacting how we view art, right? It's just someone making a quick buck because they're re-releasing their greatest hits for the 1000th time. It's not like, it would be like if the Eagles released a record that was music that was all samples and they didn't credit anybody. Like, that is what we're talking about here. But everybody loved it and acted like it was their original music.
So are we really to the point where Canva and ChatGPT and Lensa are making us fundamentally reconsider art at this point?
I think we're getting there. And I think the Lensa specifically, at least in my sphere, really took a lot of people by storm of like, this is awesome. Look how cool I look. I'm a cowboy. I'm a robot. But then it came out of how it really works, and everyone was like, oh, so it's not magic. It's not a computer making, like, it's not a computer coming up with this art itself. It's a computer interpreting other forms of art, stealing and chopping it up, and then mashing it into one new thing. And that was kind of where the issue came in. So I think we're getting there. We're getting there, right? And I have, like a soapbox I wrote on here, but looking at things like the Indiana Jones 5 trailer, where it's a wholly digital younger Harrison Ford, and you really can't tell the difference. Like, we're now there where in movies these CGI creations are getting close enough where you can't really tell the difference. We're past the days of Rogue One where it's zombie Tarkin and all that.
That was terrible.
But we're getting to the point where the CGI creations or de-aging in movies is becoming so realistic that it's becoming legitimately hard to tell the difference. And it's, between that and the AI art generation, it's like, where is there room for people at this point, for the human touch of it all? And that's what really, interests me and kind of scares me.
So for years now, before AI existed, before computer generated graphics in movies and TV existed, people have been using makeup to make you look older or make you look younger. That never caused us to question the purpose of the place of art in the world. Why would de-aging someone digitally cause that kind of conflict in the art world now?
Well, because for makeup, like you have to apply that, right? You have to. It's a physical thing you have to do. With this, it's less about the de-aging and more about the like making someone young again, so you can make more movies with them. Like Harrison Ford is like 80 years old. He can't be Indiana Jones like he was in the 80s. But if we can de-age him and like make him look young again, even though he's an old man in real life, we can keep making these movies and keep pumping them out. That's where I think the issue is. When you're doing old age makeup or trying to make someone look young with makeup, it's a little bit different because you still know underneath that makeup is still the person, right? Whereas with this, it's not. It's a robot.
So, okay, I will counter that with Chris Pine in Star Trek. So they didn't use makeup, they didn't use digital de-aging. They just changed the actor and they relaunched the entire franchise. So it happens. There's different methods of this happening in doing what they did, because they did the same thing with Luke Skywalker.
Yep.
Where they didn't even bring Mark Hamill in to play the role, or even to do the voice, because in Boba Fett, whatever, Book of Boba, or
Yeah, the
Mando
Mandalorian
2.5,
Yeah.
or in that episode where he comes in, his voice is even digitally redone by an AI voice manipulating.
And now Darth Vader, James Earl Jones, is no longer the voice. It's all
Right.
signed over to AI.
So he signed it over, and they can generate James Earl Jones' voice through AI. I'm struggling to understand where the issue is with that.
I think when it comes to, we'll use James Earl Jones as the example. When you get into like a vocal performance, when you get into the human element of it, there are things that he might do when he does a read for the fifth take that he does something different, and it's way better, right? And it was a fluke, but hey, he read it this way, and that's the line we're going to use. When you get it with AI, I don't think they're going to be able to do, like, there's that human element where you can get that random spark of creativity or performance that elevates a role more than it would just be if it was a human doing it. I think it's really that loss of the human element that I think is the dangerous part.
Well, and I think the ultimate goal of AI is to not have the human element injected into it, but have its own unique element injected into it. So I think you still have the potential for that. It didn't just have James Earl Jones record every word in the English dictionary and it just assembles them together like a really bad AI.
They should do that. That'd be pretty funny.
It basically recorded his inflections and his ability to say certain syllables. It was a much more sophisticated thing than just recording words. And then the AI assembles those sounds, but it doesn't do it the same way every time.
But like, isn't that weird? Like, James Earl Jones is still alive, right? And unfortunately, he's going to die one day. But they're still going to use that after he's dead to make Star Wars movies with Darth Vader. Isn't that weird? It's like putting him in the ghost in the machine.
You know what? They embalmed Lennon's body and they stuck it on display in the public square for decades.
Yeah, but they didn't Weekend at Bernie's him like a puppet in a movie after he was dead. Like, I don't know. It's something about like when it comes to real life people being like turned into AI generated things, whether it be the Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones 5 or James Earl Jones and now with Darth Vader. When you're taking real people that are in real life and harnessing them using AI for creative things, it doesn't sit right with me. It just seems strange. I don't know.
Well, and you know what? To play devil's advocate here, James Earl Jones wasn't just James Earl Jones who was the voice of Darth Vader. There was so much audio work that went into that voice that it wasn't just him talking into a microphone. So there was already more to it than just James Earl Jones. If they can get that out of a computer and James Earl Jones doesn't have to show up and he already got his paycheck.
Yeah, but like, sure, there are other elements, but his voice is still the core of it, right? So if he died in the world where we don't have AI, that'd be it.
So I will counter that argument with every other element, every other example of Star Wars that Darth Vader shows up in and it's voiced by someone beside James Earl Jones. It's not believable.
I don't know, man. We got to figure something out then. Like, At a certain point, you gotta like the real world has to have some kind of impact. Like we can't like I don't know. Was Carrie Fisher alive when they did that Rogue One thing? I think she was at the
Yes.
time, right? Like that's so weird. It's so weird that these are real people that are aging that we are just plucking like the best version of them and putting them in like CGI. And now with the voices is like eternalized. I don't know. It freaks me out.
Well, all right. So I'll give you a different angle on that. So you have, as an actor, especially a female actor, you have a finite lifespan that the industry will tolerate your aging to, right? So if you get to a point, let's say you're 50, okay, the number of roles that you run into when you're 50 are severely limited. If someone could extend their acting career and their opportunity to make money in the business by allowing digital manipulation of their features, don't you think that's at least a worthwhile endeavor for it?
Yeah, I guess, but like, do we just want to completely give in to like ageism and not try to fix it? Like, or we just want to submit to like the industry-wide like issue? I don't know. It just seems like we're compromising just to not have to like tackle the real problem head on.
Well, and I agree that it's a problem that needs to be tackled. But in the meantime, you're robbing people of opportunities if you take that tool away.
Yeah, but you're robbing them of opportunities by like being ageist too. So it's like
I agree, but the problem is a role may require somebody of a certain age to be convincing.
wouldn't you be taking away opportunities from potentially another actress that is right for the part if we're going to instead use AI or robot Carrie Fisher instead of recasting someone that might be good at it?
It's possible, but if you were doing a Star Wars film that was after Rogue One, and you needed Princess Leia in there, now granted it's a little different because she's passed away, but if you needed someone that's age appropriate who was that actor, wouldn't it be easier and more convincing to age reduce that actor so they could do that role?
No.
Well, why not? Because then you'd wind up getting like somebody who looks nothing like Han Solo showing up in a Han Solo movie. Okay,
That's true. That movie had other problems. I think that was I don't know. We're not. This is not the Solo podcast, but I don't know. For me personally, I think it should be a recasting. I don't think it should be using AI. People cling, especially when it comes to Star Wars and properties like it. People cling to that past so hard. The past, what did Kylo Ren say? Kill it if you have to. Like, I think I don't know. We're getting like it's like the metatextual level of this, but I think like we can't just like keep digging up these people and putting them into computers and like Indiana
no,
Jones.
but you can. That's the point. You
that's
can.
that's the beauty of it. We can. We never have to move on.
Nobody has to die now.
No one's ever really gone. I don't know, man. I guess we'll see when Indiana Jones 5 comes out and they just make a whole movie with CGI Harrison Ford and call it a day.
Okay. So you
Hey, man,
went through-
support your local artist, all right, before the robots come for us all.
So that's really what you're getting at here. The risk that you're seeing here is that it could severely negatively impact actual artists with what.
Yeah, it's like the old auto factories, right? Once they figured out how to automate all that stuff, all those people got fired. If we can automate writing a script for a movie, the people that are in the movie, their voices, the effects, if we can automate all that stuff, we don't even need people anymore. And at a certain point,
So that's a twisted idea of what history is. When they automated factories, people, instead of doing menial, repetitive tasks, were trained to do better tasks. What killed auto factories were unions that kept trying to get more and more money for people. Okay, so let's just put history aside for a second there and not distort it that much.
it would still be the same outcome, though. With if we found a way to automate all this stuff, where people couldn't tell the difference, we wouldn't need people to do it anymore. And I think,
but instead of being a makeup artist, you become a digital effects artist.
what if they don't want to do that? What if they like makeup? They shouldn't be forced to change because of.
So then you work in stage, okay?
they go work at Walmart.
They're not digitally enhancing anybody on the stage in a play, okay?
Not yet. We have holograms.
You're killing me.
I'm just saying it's something to think about. It's really important that we keep the human element in these things because that's where we get sparks of creativity that you couldn't get from a robot. There's things that they don't understand. There's ways to perform, ways to say things, ways to create that AI will never know.
Until we get to the self-aware AI, and then you got to worry about other things.
Yeah, then they're coming here and they're going to get me first. They're going to turn me into AI sausage.
You picked over most of your soapbox here. Was there anything else that you wanted to sum up there?
No, that's pretty much it. Watch out. Just be weary. Anything AI, I think you should be weary. Make sure you're making sure where this stuff is coming from. Don't just look at it like it's like science magic. It's not. All these things have to come from somewhere, real tangible things.
I agree. And to be honest with you, the point of support your local artist, I absolutely agree with. That's why one of the things that I really enjoy when we go to these comic book shows and these pop culture shows is interacting with some of these artists, looking at what they're doing, watching what they're doing live, communicating with them, talking to them, what inspires them. I find that to be one of the most rewarding things of going to these shows and actually seeing the brilliance that's out there in a lot of the young artists today.
Absolutely. I don't really have any artistic talent, so I have a lot of like admiration for people.
You have a lot of pent-up frustration.
Yeah,
on that.
why couldn't it be me? I want to use a robot. No, but people that can just pick up a pen and just make something brilliant. Like it's incredible, and I just think that we need to make sure that sticks around. Also, when you're going to these shows, make sure that whoever you're buying from isn't using Lensa to just make this art and sell it to you, because that is for sure going to happen, because people will try to swindle you. So just think about it.
All right. I think that was all we had today, unless you were...
No, that was it.
You still worked up? You get all off your chest?
Hey, man, I think we fixed it.
Okay.
As with every show, we've solved all the problems.
You know what? We didn't end with doom and gloom.
That's true. We led with it, and then we worked our way back.
There you go. A little reverse psychology there. All right, so that was it for the show today. Before we do go, I do want to once again ask that you subscribe to the podcast. Audio versions of this podcast can be found listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things. We are available on Pandora, Castro, Stitcher, Amazon, anywhere you get a podcast. I would also ask you to write in, give us your feedback. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. We do stream on Twitch 5 days a week at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. If you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you do get a free monthly Twitch Prime subscription. We'd appreciate if you threw that our way. You can find us on Instagram at Insights Into Things, or you can find links to all that and more on our website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the book.
Stay safe out there, everybody.
Bye.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, where we take a deeper look into how the issues of today will impact the world of tomorrow. From politics and world news to media and technology, we discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insight into Tomorrow. This is episode 17, Women's Rights Are Human Rights. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my special guest host this week from our Insights into Entertainment podcast, Michelle Whalen. How are you doing today, Michelle?
Full of many, many emotions.
I can imagine. We had actually planned on doing this podcast for a little while now. We've been working on putting it together and stuff. Right. Understanding that there was going to be an impending decision. And today was the scheduled day that we were going to do this.
Right. Not knowing
that yesterday was going to be the day that the other shoe dropped.
Right.
So we're going to continue to go through the material that we did plan, and we reserved the last segment to have an open discussion on the groundbreaking, rule-shattering, country-damaging decision, I think, that came yesterday. So there's been a disturbing trend in recent years in the United States. There's been an assault on women's, an assault has been waged on basic human rights. Victims of this assault have been chosen by color of their skin and their gender and various other things. All are victims that have been targeted for generations and have fought for their equal human rights. In this episode of Insights into Tomorrow, we're going to take a deeper look at the assault specifically on women's rights. We'll take a look at the history of women's rights through the years. We'll examine the current state of women's rights, and we'll explore the threats against those rights. Before we leave, we'll take a special look at the current issue of abortion and the not-so-impending Supreme Court decision that threatens to overturn, which it did overturn, Roe versus Wade. But before we do that, I'd like to take a moment to invite our listening and viewing audiences to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. You can find video and audio of all the network's podcasts listed as Insights into Things, and you can pick those up anywhere you can get a podcast these days. We're pretty much everywhere. I would also invite you to write in, give us your comments, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing. Email us at comments@insightsintothings.com, where you can find links to all of our social media on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
As ready as we'll ever be.
Let's get into it.
So, all women are entitled to human rights. These include the right to live free from violence and discrimination, to enjoy the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health, to be educated, and to own property, to vote, and to earn an equal wage. Across the globe, many women and girls still face discrimination on the basis of sex and gender. Gender inequality underpins many problems which disappropriately affect women and girls, such as domestic and sexual violence, lower pay, lack of access to education, and inadequate health care. For many years, women's rights movements have fought hard to address these inequalities, campaigning to change laws or taking to the streets to demand their rights are respected. And new movements have flourished in the digital age, such as the Me Too campaign, which highlights the prevalence of gender-based violence and sexual harassment.
So there has been a fairly long history of women's fight for their rights, in the United States at least, because when the country was formed, there was no explicit provisions in the Constitution for women's rights to anything.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution protected, quote, consent of the government, consent of the governed, which at the time meant white landholding men only.
Right.
The Bill of Rights did not protect everyone either. Women were considered second-class citizens. They were essentially property of their husbands.
So women started to organize as early as the Seneca Falls Convention in July of 1848. It planted the seeds for the women's suffrage movement. It pushed for equal rights for all people of all races and sexes. The end result was the signing of the Declaration of Sentiments by 100 men and women, a document based on the Declaration of Independence.
So we move into the women's suffrage movement. This is really probably the foundation for the first fight for women's rights. Wyoming passed the first law granting women the right to vote in 1869 and was the first state to grant women the right to vote in all elections in 1890. But it took until 1920 for the 19th Amendment to the Constitution to allow women the right to vote across the country.
So now let's talk a little bit about abortion and contraception. So there were widespread anti-contraception laws on the books as late as 1819 before they were challenged, starting with Margaret Sanger in New York. Abortion laws criminalized the act of ending a pregnancy apart from saving a woman's life were in place and well into the 60s before any challenges were raised. These obviously culminated into the 1973 Roe v. Wade Supreme Court ruling that being drawn into question, unfortunately, as of yesterday.
Yeah. So then we move on to women's equal employment and equal pay. The first minimum wage laws applied to women didn't come into effect until 1912. This was later superseded by the 1938 Fair Labor Standards Act, imposing a federal minimum age regardless of gender. It wasn't until 1963 with the Equal Pay Act that any attention was given to equitable wages, well, wages too probably, but wages for the same work performed by men. It took until 1974 for Congress to include gender protection in fair housing and education as part of the Civil Rights Act. Now, it's worth noting that even though these laws were on the books, they're on the books today. They're not observed. There's still discrimination today, despite the fact that we have these laws on the books.
Right, exactly. And finally, leadership in government. So the first woman to serve in Congress was Jeanette Pickering Rankin, who didn't take her seat until 1917. But it would take nearly 100 years for a woman to take on the leadership role of Speaker of the House when Nancy Pelosi assumed that role for the first time in 2007. And we didn't see our first Supreme Court justice until 1981 with Sandra Day O'Connor. And Madeleine Albright was our first Secretary of State in 1997. And obviously, our first female Vice President, Kamala Harris, in 2020.
So, the disturbing trend that I see in this history here is there's spurts of progress. There's long periods where there's no progress. Then you get a few exceptional people that just get mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore, and they do something about it.
Yep.
And the establishment throws a couple of crumbs out there and gives a little bit of rights to people. And then there's a long period of time until it happens again. How do you think this compares to other fights, civil rights, for instance? How do you think this compares to civil rights for African Americans and minorities?
It's almost the same, really, when you think about it. Unless you are a rich white male, you're fighting every day, and maybe once in a while something comes along that you get something, and then unfortunately something else in the news is going to pop up where everybody's mindset is on something else, and that fight still hasn't been won.
Yeah.
And until something happens with that fight again, everybody kind of forgets about it, because again, our attention span, is, we have short attention span theater, of our minds. Look at, not to get on a totally different tangent, but all of the school shootings, it's been how many weeks and none of that is in the news. There, you have the gun reforms that are they're trying to pass, but again, now that you have everything going on with Roe v. Wade, that's the main focus. But yet there's other things that still need to be focused. Black Lives Matter still needs to be a focus, because you had everything that went on with George Floyd and all the other African Americans who, with the police issues and things like that. And none of that was solved, but because something else came along, oh, well, now our attention, we have to, but no, you have to go back and do all the other things.
It's funny you mention that. What do you think is the cause of that? Is that a media issue? Is that a society issue? Is it a politics issue where politicians don't want to deal with the issue, so they distract with something else? Or is it media just trying to get ratings that's dictating what our issues are today?
I don't know. I think it's a little bit of, I think everybody's a little bit to blame with all of that. Because obviously media is one aspect, and when you kind of think back of, okay, well, why did it take so long? So Wyoming, it was the 1800s when, Wyoming, but it wasn't until the 1900s that it was actually, and you have to think back then, how long did it take for news to travel? How long, same thing with Juneteenth. It was signed into law that blacks were no longer slaves, but how many years did it take for the news to actually travel? Right. There was no quick way to do it, where now we have that instant gratification. We can, as soon as news broke yesterday of the Supreme Court's decision, everybody in the world knew about it. So I think a lot of it is because we're so hungry for information right now, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What do I need to do? And also, we're all so tired. We're all so tired of having to stand up for everybody. And there's just so much injustice. It's like, well, where do I put my my energy?
Where's my next fight? Yeah.
And it's like, I have no more spoons to give. My jar is empty because I've given, so much, because there's so much that's needed, from all of us. I think that's, where it comes to, because there's obviously thousands and thousands of organizations and different things that are in need, but it's, how much can the average person give before you have nothing left to give?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been a problem. Let's take a little break. We'll come back and we're going to talk a little bit more detail about where we are right now with these specific women's rights. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
So let's talk about the current state of women's rights. And we'll talk first about women's suffrage. At the moment, it's safe to say that fight has been won, I guess, kind of, sort of, in the general statement, yes.
If nothing else, we can say that women are equally discriminated against with everyone else when it comes to your right to vote these days.
Yes.
Okay, there's no special discrimination.
Right.
Against women on this one.
Okay, we can go with that. Abortion and contraception. Well, this had been won, but it looks like it might be a split decision with the much anticipated ruling from the majority right-wing Supreme Court that was held yesterday. And we'll have more on this later on in the show.
So we take a look at employment and pay. So legally on paper, this was a win back in 1963 with the Equal Pay Act. Do you feel like this was a win?
No.
And I think most women would be of the same opinion. In practice, there's a long fight ahead of this one. Progress continues to be made, but not nearly enough to level the playing field between men and women, equal pay, equal work. It's a mess. And the fact that people are still getting away with it is frankly disturbing, that you can get away with it.
Yep.
Leadership in government. There was a surprising amount of progress early on this, but it's been painfully slow in coming into the modern time. Since, the 80s, 2000, we've seen some progress here. Many parts of the country are progressive enough to make the progress that's needed. There are other parts, and less progressive, less evolved parts of the country, where politics is still an old boys network. But from a national standpoint, we're seeing, we have a female vice president now, which is huge. How do you think, let's talk women's suffrage, your ability to vote. Do you feel you have the ability to go out there and vote when you want, for who you want, how you want?
Absolutely. And that's something I've never felt I wasn't able to do. I've never felt that I wasn't allowed. Even in high school, senior year was when I turned 18, and I had a history teacher who was very passionate about the women's movement and made sure she had her little pamphlets in her desk drawer, and who's turning 18 this month, fill out your form so you can vote. And she said, it doesn't matter if it's a presidential election, if it's a governor election, even your little local election, you will vote every time because there are women that died doing this. It is your heritage. It is your responsibility to pass this on and make sure you vote.
How do you think how can I say this without getting hate mail? How do you think the outcome of the 2020 election
or the 2016 election, we can even go.
You could, but specifically the 2020 election, in which there was an artificial stigma built up about the legitimacy of the election and voting and voter fraud. And it drew the entire country into that. And now we're seeing certain states that support a certain party are now imposing laws that, if not discriminating against people from voting,
will make it harder,
making it much more difficult.
Absolutely. And that's...
Do you feel threatened by that?
Fortunately, I don't, because at this point we are in a very blue state, and I've never felt threatened going to our polling places. We don't have far to travel. We usually never have more than 5 minutes to wait, if we even have a wait whenever we've gone. And I know that's not the case for states right next to ours, where people will wait in line hours to cast their vote, or have to travel, an hour to get to their polling place. And I would probably feel intimidated if I had to go through all those measures, and almost jump through hoops to fulfill my civic duty.
Right.
And nobody should have to feel that way to do that.
Absolutely. Abortion and contraception. So for now, we're going to put abortion aside because we already have a discussion on the last segment. Contraception.
Mhm.
Do you feel that you can acquire the contraception that you want and that the health care that you need as far as women's health is readily available to you? Do you think that's a threat? Do you think progress needs to be made on that front?
So, again, being a white female, a middle class white female in a blue state, I don't feel discriminated at all against any healthcare. I know that's not the case for others of my gender in other parts of our country. That now that is something that there are rumors about being taken away. Now you see all over social media people saying, if you're on some sort of IUD, if you're on any sort of implant, get it replaced now. Anything that, has a couple of years, because we don't know what's coming down the pike. The fact that some male can make a decision what I do with my body absolutely blows my mind. And that, whether or not I'm a married woman or a single woman should have nothing to do with it either. And that if I want to have a child, it should be by choice.
Right.
I should not be forced. I am still of age where I could have a child. I am not at a point where I would want to begin that process all over again. And I need to have that body autonomy. That's my right to decide that, and nobody else should decide it. I don't make a decision for anybody if they want to be on Viagra or not, or if they want to get reconstructive surgery or some. I don't make that decision for anybody else. So nobody should be making a decision
Sure.
for what I do to myself.
And I agree 110%. As long as you don't expect the government to pay for it, then
Right.
it's your say what you do.
Mhm.
I'm totally down with that.
Mhm.
Employment and pay. Where do we stand with this? Do you think there's sufficient progress? Do you think you're compensated fairly for what you do? And do you think that there is a threat to that looming?
I don't know. It's one of those things because, of course, at most places of employment, one of the rules is you don't talk about how much you make. So, you don't find out how much somebody else is making. So that's a really hard, I know, or I shouldn't say I assume within the company that I work in, there are people that work in the North Jersey facility that make much more money than the people in the South Jersey facility.
And that's unusual because of geographics.
Right, absolutely. But again, it shouldn't matter where I'm physically located because I'm doing just as much work as
Well, there's certain
somebody
factors like cost of living and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
That you have to factor in the
Totally.
salary.
I totally.
But compensation-wise, on a 1-to-1 ratio, are you being fairly compensated?
I really don't know, because it's one of the things that probably bad on me is I kind of stopped paying attention, because there's always these websites you can go to and say, how much does a person that does this job make? And the thing is, what I do for a living is kind of specific to my job, so it's kind of hard to say if I went someplace else where I could kind of try and figure it out. And I think I know I'm probably underpaid. Just one, because I'm,
Is it because you're a woman, or because you're a one of a kind person doing what you do?
I don't know. It might be a combination of both. We recently at my company had somebody who left the company who was a woman. I never asked her or found out how much she made. I knew she probably made more than I did, even though I've been with the company much longer than she had been. And we recently hired somebody who I knew was a grade level or a position higher than her. And I have a feeling probably started out making more than she did.
Okay.
So that's another,
So clearly we're not where we need to be.
No.
Leadership in government. So my question to you here is, clearly we're seeing progress certainly on the federal level. A lot of states are making progress with women in leadership positions. You personally, do you think the door is open for you if you wanted to get into, say, local politics? Do you think you'd have any obstacles with that? Do you think you'd be discriminated against because of your gender?
I don't know. I think in a lot of cases it's still a boys' club when you come to, your local. But I'm sure there are some areas of the country where it's not like that. I've never been interested in wanting to run for a government position, so it was never something that I thought about, but I could see where I wouldn't, again, where we live, where we are. I'm sure if it was something where I started volunteering or doing things, I could, eventually see something.
What's interesting is of the 4 fundamental rights that we talked about, 3 of these you attributed to some level of political influence on how it impacts you.
Mm-hmm.
That's disturbing. That women's rights are a matter of politics.
And they shouldn't be.
No, they shouldn't. And I think that is a highlight of where we are today. And it astounds me, and we're not going to pull any punches here. You're obviously a Democratic supporter.
I am? How did you know?
What astounds me is your experience, I would say, is pretty typical for most women. Democratic women or Republican women. But there are so many staunch Republican women that support a party that has, for over a century, had policies that were contrary to women's interests.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it about people like that who would support someone who wants to hold you down? Like, I almost attribute it to like a beaten wife syndrome type thing.
Yeah.
Where they just accept their place as a lesser citizen in society.
And you have to kind of think that, there are still women that are young girls, women that are raised today to, your only job in life is to raise the family, right, and support your husband. And that's it. And I'm not knocking anyone that's what they want to do in their life. If that's
what you aspire to do, knock your socks off.
Right.
But don't hold other people back.
Exactly.
In the process.
But don't tell me that I can't do more.
Absolutely.
Or tell my daughter that she can't be more.
Yeah, that's my hang up about this whole thing. As much as I hate seeing how you are treated, it irks me to think that she's going to face some of these same prejudices. And it really pisses me off.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to do everything I can to make sure that she's got every opportunity.
And I'm so proud of what she stands for and what she believes in. And yes, a lot of it has to do with us, but there's a lot that, you know, is her own, you know, and I'm so glad that we raised her and are still raising her to be so open-minded to things. And she, in so many cases, is more open-minded than we will ever be. And that gives me hope that, you know, she's also surrounded, you know, she surrounds herself with people that feel that way too.
Yeah.
And that generation will hopefully make a difference and bring about so much that more than we could ever hope for.
I'm also very fortunate that she's patient enough to help
educate,
carry me along in that journey.
Yes.
I've learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot from her that I never thought I would learn.
Mm-hmm.
Let's take another break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at what some of the obstacles and threats are to these rights. We'll be right back.
Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Talking to real teens about real teen problems. Explore issues from braces to puberty, social anxiety to financial responsibility. Each week, we talk about the topics concerning today's youth. We look at how the issues affect teens, how to cope with these issues, and how parents, friends, and loved ones can help teens handle these challenges. Check out our video episodes on youtube.com/insightsintothings. Catch our audio versions on podcast.insightsintoteens.com or on the web at insightsintothings.com.
So, threats and obstacles to women's rights in America. And, you know, we'll attack these rights as we've been doing in order. So the first one we're going to talk about is women's suffrage. So in the wake of the toxic 2020 elections, there's been a wholesale attack on voting rights. These attacks aren't targeted specifically at women and are designed to make it harder for people in general to vote. Not too much in general, but there's specific segments of the population they're targeted at. So some of the obstacles. 17 states have enacted 28 new laws that restrict access to voting by targeting citizens with disabilities. You know, the fact that they're not including accessibility, common accessibility options to get into voting places that make it difficult for people with disabilities to vote.
Mm-hmm.
They're attacking absentee voting. After the 2020 election, when absentee voting was done, because we were in the middle of a pandemic, a pandemic that the sitting president ignored for the first 4 months and downplayed it and pretended it didn't exist and created the crisis in the first place. They're attacking provisional ballots. They're requiring voter ID, which there's nothing. Take a drink here. I'm joking to death. This is how much I hate these rules. There's nothing in the Constitution that says voter ID is required to cast your vote. Nowhere. So I don't know where they're coming up with that one. They're targeting voter registration. They're making it harder to register. Mm-hmm. They're requiring different requirements to now register. They're instituting registration purging. So normally with registration purging, if you don't vote in so many elections, they purge you from the voter registration roll. Well, that number of elections is usually like 4, 5, something like that, presidential elections. Now they're saying if you don't vote in the last one, you're not registered anymore.
Oh, see,
You need to register again to vote. They're restricting student voting, making it difficult for students, because before they would make it accessible to students to vote during student hours and stuff like that at colleges. They're restricting that. And they're limiting polling places to make it harder to vote. So people who are, again, disabled, infirmed, aged, people that don't drive, they're making them travel hours to get to a voting place to cast a vote, knowing that they won't vote because they're the people that they don't want voting because they're going to vote for the opposition.
Right.
So that's some of what we're looking at here. Not specifically against women, but affecting everybody.
Right. And you figure it's the lower income, more likely the people of color.
Yep.
That's the areas that they're really targeting.
Absolutely. So what's your next one?
Abortion. Somehow, after nearly 50 years, this is still a matter of debate. Instead of being an ideological discussion, anything to do with abortions has turned into a political discussion, which generally means that all logic is out the window with it. There is a real threat to women's reproductive rights with the recent leaked draft of the opinion by the Supreme Court that now wasn't just a leak, because now it has come to fruition that they have now overturned Roe v. Wade.
More on that later.
Later on.
Deep cleansing breaths.
Deep cleansing breaths. Okay. Let's go back to employment and pay. So on average, women earn 82 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And in comparing salaries over 350 jobs, women actually earn less in nearly all jobs. Women earn less than their same race and ethnicity, their counterparts at entry-level positions, of education attained as well. So the pandemic is estimated to have set the women's labor force back more than 30 years.
So there's that progress that we're losing.
That astonishes me that during the pandemic that even, happened. Finally, leadership in government. Again, we now finally have a woman vice president. How many years did that take? And then you even look back, how far was when the first vice president, female vice president, was in the 80s, late 80s, and then
Geraldine Ferraro.
Geraldine Ferraro.
Nomination.
Never elected. And then you even had Sarah Palin, the second, never elected.
Right.
So it took 3 women, but how many years, obviously, to get to that position? Another interesting thing, for the first time in our history as a government, there will be 2 female signatures posted on currency in our country, because we will have the treasurer has Secretary of the Treasurer, and what's the other signature that's on the bill? I can't think of what it is, but that was something that came out in the news because of a newly appointed position. Top 2 women in money.
Right. See, and I'll tell you, while that's nice that we've gotten to that point, what annoys me is every time the press takes this is the first time a woman did this, and this is the first time a woman...
Right.
It annoys me that we're saying that.
Right. It's annoying that we have to say anything like that. And when you look at... Obviously, there are other countries in the world that will never have women in government. But then there are other countries that have had women in leadership and had women in politics so much longer, and they kind of look at us and go, How backwards are you?
And these women were incredibly strong, competent women who overshadowed their previous male counterparts by a long shot,
right,
in most cases.
So it just baffles me with as progressive as we say we are as a country, we're so backwards than so much more.
Well, and the thing that annoys me when we say it's the first woman to do this, that fact doesn't annoy me. But what annoys me is that attention that we draw to it being the first woman to do that is the same attention that the detractors use.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, you have a first woman in the Treasury and look at what the economy's like. As if it's their fault.
Right.
And they use that fact that they're a woman
right.
as justification for how things are and the state of it. And
right.
it annoys me that they do that.
Right. And the other thing, too, is how many women had to do so many other things to get that person, to lift that woman up.
Absolutely.
To do that. That's the thing.
Standing on the shoulders of giants.
Absolutely.
And women like Kamala Harris was extremely complimentary and appreciative of all the women that came before her that gave her the opportunity that she has today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of obstacles out there that we need to
we've come far, but we haven't come far enough.
Right. And it's almost like the old boys network. Their attitude's almost like, all right, well, we threw you a bone. Now shut up and go away for a while. Okay, you're fine. Like, they're terrified of having an equal playing field, and they think trickling little bits out here and there will keep the masses occupied and quiet them down when they get a little riled up, which is unfortunate. That's why you know, the one thing that I think might come out of this Supreme Court ruling is that a lot of rich white guys might not have a career in politics moving forward anymore. Let's
hope and pray.
We'll talk about
prayers
that.
And thoughts.
We're going to take our last break, and we'll talk about that when we come back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
So, women's rights are human rights.
Damn Skippy.
And as of yesterday, I think we've seen a significant encroachment upon women's rights.
You think?
So, this is our open discussion on Roe versus Wade and abortion in general. You have the floor, dear.
I don't even know where to
rip into it. How about we start with just the hypocrisy of the Supreme Court's decision? Because the day before, they had a very contradictory decision.
Absolutely. They said that you could carry a gun, that it's okay to carry around a gun now. You don't need to conceal it anymore.
Right. So New York had some very common sense gun safety laws
for over 100 years,
designed to save lives,
right?
Which the Supreme Court decided that was a constitutional violation,
right?
Where if you read the Constitution and the Second Amendment, nowhere in there does it say anything about carrying concealed weapons by citizens,
right?
It speaks entirely about pertaining to a well-regulated, regulated
Militia. Right.
Which for some reason everyone seems to want to ignore that.
Right.
So
because it's all up for interpretation. Yep. That's what it is.
So the Supreme Court decides that we're going to do away with common sense gun law because it's against people's constitutional rights.
Mm-hmm.
But now you can't get an abortion.
Nope.
So we're preserving life on one side with overturning Roe versus Wade, but we really don't give a damn about it because you can carry guns and shoot anybody you want.
Right. So one of the memes, our government is bold enough to force you to have a kid, but is too weak to ensure that they make it to recess alive.
Yeah.
If that is not...
That's profound.
With between the past 2 days of the Supreme Court, that how...
Yeah. It highlights the ludicrous level of hypocrisy coming out of today's Supreme Court.
Right. The fact that church and state is supposed to be separate, but yet the church has more say over my body, and I'm not a member of a church.
Right.
My religion, I am Jewish, if you didn't know, my religion states abortion is okay. Because my life is more important than what is in my body, what is in my womb.
Yeah.
And until what is growing in my womb can live and take 3 breaths on its own, it doesn't have a choice over me.
Well, you could also interpret the 2 rulings from the Supreme Court of you can have an abortion as long as you don't mind getting shot in the process.
Right. Right. And unfortunately, there has been violence that has happened at clinics that aren't even performing abortions, because that's the other thing, is that everybody goes after Planned Parenthood. Oh, they're doing all these abortions and da-da-da-da. That's not even their main purpose. That they are giving health care to women, and somebody going there just for a routine checkup is risking their life from these crazy psychopaths who are trying to save the unborn child, but yet are taking their gun to go kill people.
Well, and to play devil's advocate for a minute there, you have people who are pro-abortion who are also attacking anti-abortion clinics as well. So you've got violence on both sides. You've got crimes being committed on both sides. But if nothing else, that should simply highlight the level of passion involved here, that the decision that the Supreme Court made to overturn a previous Supreme Court decision, which, honestly, that's where I have my biggest problem, is the Supreme Court has basically made itself useless.
Right.
They decided that no matter what we decide, it doesn't matter because the guys 5 years from now can overturn it.
Right, and that's where now... Okay, so everybody's, kind of, you have the people that are like, oh, well, it's still at the state level and da-da-da-da-da, and now you can still travel to get to states even though they were passing laws saying that you couldn't, and that there were certain laws where, if the doctor performed one, they were going to be jailed, and the woman who received it was going to be jailed, and all this other... But this isn't where it's going to stop.
Right.
That's the thing that most people aren't looking at, is now that you've taken this away, now all these other rights of, gay and lesbian couples, you're seeing that there are people out there that are, get a hold of a lawyer, make sure everything is written and that you have legal documentation. If you have children, make sure there is legal documentation. Make sure you have copies of your birth certificates and everything, that both parents are listed. If you got married in a state that is in danger of overturning your marriage decision, I have various clergy friends that are now offering free to remarry you in a state that is protecting you. You know, and the contraception, that's another thing that now, you know, oh, thank God for Clarence Thomas, you know, for everything. But you know what law he's not going to overturn is loving, because that affects him, because he's married to a lovely white woman who, but all the recent things he's picking in, you know, oh, well, I can't do that one, but I can do this one.
And this is the problem that I have, is that our current Supreme Court has turned into an activist court.
Mm-hmm.
And their job is to rule on the constitutionality
Mm-hmm.
of laws and situations.
Right.
It's not to make new laws. It's not to overturn laws. The Supreme Court should never be able to overturn a Supreme Court decision.
Right.
Because the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court.
Right.
It's the law of the land.
Right.
If they can overturn their own decisions,
Mm-hmm.
where do you go from there?
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, is now what else is on the books that you can overturn?
Right. The only way a Supreme Court decision should be overturned is with a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that should overturn.
Right.
So a couple of things that come out of this. One, you're going to see an assault on other freedoms that the
Mm-hmm.
right-wing nut jobs in the Supreme Court don't agree with. That's
Yep.
the number one concern. Number two, you're going to push decisions like this down to the state.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have 50 different laws in 50 different states governing all these different things.
We're basically becoming 50 different countries at
Yep.
this point.
Yep. The other problem that I have is now, because you're going to see the Supreme Court overturning Supreme Court precedent, the only way to defend against that is a constitutional amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And to think of our politics today and who, you know, how that razor sharp edge that we're on right now
Mm-hmm.
between Republican and Democrat, to think that these idiots would contemplate doing amendments to the Constitution terrifies me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we thought we were ripping the Constitution apart with the 2020 election. These people are just itching to rewrite it in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what scares me more than anything else. Yes, the whole abortion thing is probably never should have gotten to the Supreme Court, because really it's not, and at least it shouldn't have gotten there in the form that it did, because abortion is not a constitutionally protected right. Your health is, your personal well-being is, and that's how it should have been presented
Mm-hmm.
to the Supreme Court, and then you couldn't overturn it at that point.
Right, right.
But things that go to the Supreme Court now don't matter.
Right.
Because after a couple of years and you get a couple of justices retire, whoever happens to be president at the time, they're going to switch it their way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a real threat that Joe Biden might pack the Supreme Court now because of the situation that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So then, okay, so 5 years down the line, when we have a new president out there, what's going to happen there? Are
Right.
we going to wind up with 50 Supreme Court justices? Because every time a new president comes in, they want to make sure that the court's tilted in their favor.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's, this decision breaks the country.
Mm-hmm. In so many ways.
Yeah. Do you feel threatened by this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And fortunately, again, I'm an older woman. Ugh, as much as that hurts me. Who I know if, again, something were to happen, I have the means, I have the ability to get the help that I would need. No matter what, because again, we live in a state where it is still legal and will probably always remain legal. I worry about women, girls, trans men, even, who live in areas where they don't have it accessible and can't get the help that they need.
Yeah.
That's what makes me angry. And, you know, I want to go fight.
What do you think needs to happen to set this right? What does the government, the president, the Supreme Court, citizens, what do we have to do to fix this and have it stay fixed? Because we thought it was fixed.
Right. And that's the thing, is there are certain states where it is fixed. No matter what the law of the land is, it's, you know, it was voted in. And that's, I think, what is so frustrating, is that why does it even need to be that way? Why do people have to vote on it? You know, if I want to go and buy a pack of cigarettes, I can go and buy a pack of cigarettes. What does it matter if I want to, you know, do that? And I've never been a smoker, and you know, I would never want to smoke, but yet you can go and that's what's just so.
Your point there being it's your body, you can do what you want to do.
Right. You know, and granted, I got into a discussion, a little bit of a debate with a friend of mine that from high school, where, you know, again, my body, my choice, and she's anti-vax, and, you know, but very liberal in certain respects and conservative, and, you know, she's kind of like all over the board, like she would never get a vaccine because she just doesn't trust the government. You know, and when I, you know, and I said, but, you know, I don't have to do certain things, or I can do certain things. And, you know, she said, well, you wore a mask when you were told to. And I was like, I wore a mask because I was protecting myself. And guess what? I still wear a mask now, even though the majority of the people don't. And yes, I am fully vaccinated and boosted and whatever, but I'm still wearing a mask because I don't want to get sick.
Yeah.
But if, you know, I think back to when I was in college, and if I had gotten pregnant in college, I wasn't ready to be a mother then, you know, so, and then there are women that, you know, have other medical issues. You know, my best friend had to have a late-term abortion because if she had carried her baby to term, she could have died.
Right.
So, it shouldn't be something that's a law that you're forced to do or not to do. It's your body, it's your choice.
And the hypocrisy, again, that we always seem to go back to the hypocrisy of this. So the Supreme Court ruled in a case where members of the armed forces sued the Army or whatever branch of the government, branch of the military they were in, when they were told that they had to get vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
And the Supreme Court ruled they didn't have to. They had a right to choose.
Right.
If you have a right to choose whether or not you take a vaccine, how do you not have a right to choose whether or not you carry a child to term?
Right.
Isn't carrying that child to full term far more impactful than getting a vaccine?
Right.
Where you would think you would have that option?
And the hypocrisy of it, too, is if men had the ability to carry, now granted, trans men can, I don't want to exclude them, but if these white cis men were, you know, at risk of their body harming them, you know, because think about it, you know, when and you've mentioned it numerous times, you know, especially watching me go through childbirth and what happened during, I ended up having to have an emergency C-section because our daughter was in distress, and you got to see firsthand what my body went through. You've said time and time again, there's no way in hell you would have been able to do that.
Right.
And I bet you if you polled, the majority of men, would you be willing to go through childbirth? Would you be willing to do all these things? No. No, they wouldn't. But yet, you'll put your partner or your wife or your mistress, you'll engage in an act and not have any thought process behind that.
Yeah. The other interesting hypocrisy here is they're forcing women to carry children to full term. Are they forcing the sperm donor to be a father, to be there, to have any level of responsibility?
And that's the thing, is that at the moment of conception, that's when you should be paying child support.
Right. Absolutely.
And you don't get to walk away now.
Yep.
That is now, there were a couple of memes like, Happy Father's Day, you're now going to be a dad because of that one night stand, because you decided, you didn't want to put a condom on.
Right. We're up against the clock here, but I did want to raise one more point. We had talked about it off the air, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning because I think it's a great example. Tell us about the adoption one.
Yeah, let me bring that one up. So this was an interesting,
because I thought this was very poignant.
Yes, this was recently posted and is something for the Supreme Court to consider. Can a 13-year-old girl adopt a baby if she wants to? No, obviously not. Are you nuts? What about a 15-year-old girl? Can she adopt a baby if she feels like it? Nope, absolutely not. All right, how about an 18-year-old girl? Surely she could adopt a baby, right? No, still can't. Well, what if she was 20, no longer a teenager? A 20-year-old can definitely adopt a baby if she feels like it, right? Actually, no. Well, weird. Why not? There are over 400,000 children in foster care, so why can't she adopt at least one of them? She just can't. And you know why? Because you have to qualify to adopt a child. There are rigorous background checks, home visits, proof of financial and mental stability, etc. It's a whole thing, right? But if she is 14 and gets impregnated by an abusive ex-boyfriend who shoved her out of his moving car and left her for dead, she must now carry to term, give birth, just figure it out somehow? Yes, that is correct. But she's only 14. She will figure it out. But she should also have been more careful and made better choices. So, to punish her for her poor choices, we force her into motherhood, which we've established she's totally unqualified for. And now, we are suddenly comfortable with a young, traumatized girl caring for a vulnerable, little screaming human being that is wholly reliant on her for survival? Yes, absolutely. Such an unexpected blessing.
And I think that right there sums up the problem. We have standards for what it means to be a qualified parent.
Yep.
We enforce them in one instance in adoption. We ignore them completely in every other instance.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else to be said on the matter at this point?
Vote.
Yep.
Stay angry. Let your voice be heard.
That is the only silver lining I see here, is that they're forcing this onto the states, which means your elected leaders will now not be able to hide behind a Supreme Court decision. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to go on record on the voting roll call on whether or not they support this. And unlike the Supreme Court justices, the 3 Supreme Court justices that Trump appointed, who all said on the record that they would not overturn Roe versus Wade, and they did,
right?
You can hold these politicians accountable by voting them out of office.
Absolutely. The other thing, too, is I've seen people posting, I currently live in a red state. I need to move. I had another friend whose children are getting ready to go to college and have now changed which schools they're considering now.
If only we could impeach Supreme Court justices for perjuring themselves during their confirmation hearings.
And that's something, that's making the rounds. So
that's all we had today. Did you have anything else before we go?
Resist.
There you go. Before we do go, I did want to once again invite our listening and viewing audience to subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Tomorrow. Video and audio of all the network's podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, anywhere you can get a podcast. We would also ask you to write in, give us your feedback, tell us how we're doing, give us your topics you'd like us to discuss. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com.
You can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/insights_things.
We do stream
We discuss how today's headlines are becoming tomorrow's reality.
Welcome to Insights into Tomorrow, episode 21. Is the Supreme Court broken? I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my co-host, Sam Whalen.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
How you doing today, Sam?
Doing okay. Excited. We're getting back into the flow. This is what, like our third episode in a couple months?
Something like that, yeah.
Back on a roll.
Yeah, well, at least now when we do plugs on our other shows, I don't have Madison saying, well, you're not quite monthly podcast. You guys don't do monthly anymore. So at least now we're getting back into the flow of things. So today we're going to be talking about whether or not the Supreme Court is broken, with a series of landmark rulings from the Supreme Court, some of which were precedent-breaking, almost by any place you can get a podcast these days.
Rest in peace, Stitcher. They're shutting down.
Are they? I hadn't heard that. Oh, I got to take those off the list then.
Yeah.
Wow, they've been around a long time, too.
I used to use Stitcher, and then they changed their interface, and it was terrible, and then I stopped using Stitcher, and I think a lot of other people did, too.
Apparently a lot of other people did, too. You can also email us or reach out to us. Our email is comments@insightsintothings.com. We are on Twitter at insights_things, or you can get links to all those and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Let's get into it.
Here we go. So our first topic comes from New York Times, and they tell us that the recent Supreme Court term concluded with a series of 6-3 decisions divided along partisan lines, with the court's 6 Republican appointees in the majority. Those rulings on affirmative action, student loans, and gay rights were reminiscent of the transformative conservative decisions issued last June on abortion, guns, religion, and climate change. Is the Supreme Court in crisis? And if so, how could it be fixed? Complaints by the Supreme Court have cropped up throughout American history, but they've taken on renewed urgency since President Biden's inauguration. In the past, some of these criticisms have come from the left, such as when Franklin Roosevelt threatened to, quote, pack the courts to protect New Deal legislation. Others emerged from the right, like anger aimed at the, quote, activist bench that decided Roe v. Wade in 1973. But more recently, Democrats, stung by the Republican Senate majority's refusal to hold hearings on President Barack Obama's nominee Merrick Garland in 2016 and its replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg with Amy Coney Barrett just weeks before the 2020 presidential election, have reinvigorated calls for reform.
So is there a problem? Is there a problem with the nation's highest court? The appointment process has become more politicized than ever, like most things in this country, leading to dogmatic justices and a court whose legitimacy among the public could be in danger. In the past, it had not been the case that the public could look at these 9 people and see them projecting the ideological preferences of the political party that brought them to the bench. After Brown versus Board of Education, a case could be made that something changed in the American psyche. The idea that the court had, quote, final interpretive authority had been solidified in the public mind, and the, quote, perceived power of the Supreme Court in popular political culture vastly expanded. This shifted the debate to how to interpret the Constitution, which created an even bigger incentive for presidents to vet and select judicial candidates who would faithfully execute their agenda. So because of that, leaders began to choose nominees who were young enough to influence decision-making for decades after that president had left office. So you're seeing, they'll appoint a judge, but even after they've left the office, we're still seeing the ramifications of that appointment years after the fact. One effect we have today are judicial amendments to the Constitution, which with no ready means to overturn them. Of course, short of Congress actually cooperating to add new amendments to the Constitution that the justices would have to consider, of course. So, we're looking at what all this means, right? These judges have a ton of power, and, with this 6-3 Republican majority, how is that affecting a lot of these decisions?
Yeah, and without going into a civics lesson here, the purpose of a 3-part government with an executive, a judicial, and a legislative branch was to have separation of power. Mm-hmm. And at no point in time when that form of government was created was the intent to have Congress actually writing laws. So the problem that we run into now is that because Congress can literally interpret what the Constitution says, they can tell you now what those laws are. So even if a law says one thing, the Supreme Court can come in and rule against how it's actually written. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that you hear a lot about in the news is your Second Amendment right to bear arms. Well, one of the things that a lot of people who talk about this subject fail to mention is that in the Constitution, it says the right to bear arms is tied directly to militia. Mm-hmm. And the Supreme Court simply interpreted that as to not be the case anymore. And they decided that everyone should be able to bear arms, whether you're with a militia. Now, if you look at the history of militias, local militias, which everyone remembers the Minutemen and all that stuff that were the militia, they were evolved through legislative processes into what is today the modern National Guard. So when we say militia today, that equivalent is National Guard. Now, you can make a case that says only the National Guard, who are citizen soldiers, should have the right to bear arms, and it would make sense. But the court didn't interpret it that way, and the court says everyone should have the ability to bear arms.
Right.
We're seeing this now, and one of the things that we're seeing now is that the decisions that are being made along partisan lines. And the entire concept of the Supreme Court is that they're supposed to be impartial. They're appointed. They're not elected. Mm-hmm. And they could be appointed by either party, of which parties themselves technically are unconstitutional, since there's no concept of political parties in the Constitution that you can make an argument for right there. But the problem that we're running into now is you've got people that are on the court that are not necessarily making impartial decisions from what people are saying. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of tough to watch, honestly. Especially when you think about how you would like things to work we're not necessarily a straight up democracy. We're a republic, or a democratic republic, right?
Federal republic.
Yeah. But in a certain extent, you would want the will of the people to be reflected by the people that are leading us. And I don't really think that's the case necessarily, especially when we are going to look at a lot of these rulings today. A lot of people don't agree with these rulings, but there really is nothing we can do about it because they're the Supreme Court and they hold all the power when it comes to these things. And especially when you've got the conservative majority, obviously a conservative agenda is going to be more pushed, than the other side of things. And there's just no getting around that.
Well, and the one point the article makes is that The only thing that Congress can do to take back the power that the people elected into them would be to come up with amendments to the Constitution. So the Supreme Court would then have to consider these amendments. Of course, they could rule any way they wanted on those amendments. But the problem you run into now is that the political environment is so contested, there's no way you're going to get both Republicans and Democrats to agree enough to get any kind of amendment passed. And to be honest with you, with the politicians we have today, I think the last thing this country needs is people starting to write amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope.
So how do we get that power back into the hands of the people?
Oh, you're asking me? I have no idea. I mean, I legitimately have no idea because, like we talked about, these folks aren't elected; they're appointed. So I guess it would be voting for the political candidates that you think would appoint the judges you want. But even then, there's no guarantee that's going to happen. I don't know if there's a legal way to to like contest it. I don't think there is. Right? It's the Supreme Court. I mean, you always go to that higher power. The highest power for law is the Supreme Court, right? So maybe at the state level.
Theoretically, the only thing that really could be done would be what the Republicans were concerned the Biden administration was going to do, and that is pack the courts. Mm. So there's nothing constitutionally that says the court is limited to 9 justices. We've had more in the past. So the president could call for the expansion of the Supreme Court, add, say, 3 additional people to the Supreme Court, appoint 3 Democrats, so you'd have
6 and 6.
6 and 6 at that point in time, and try to bring some balance back to it. That's feasible, and that's something that's well within his power, but the punishment of the attacks that he would get for packing the court like that from the Republicans, he'll be impeached within a week once he even mentions that.
But wouldn't you want it to be balanced? Is that not, like, wouldn't you want enough?
I would, as a citizen, I would.
Yeah. But I guess if you want...
As a Republican,
right.
You don't when you have the power.
Yeah.
Because, if you look at history, whenever government power has been balanced, where the executive is one party and the legislature is another party,
nothing gets done.
Nothing gets done.
Yeah.
And really, that's really the best scenario that we have at this point in time is gridlock. Because if neither side can get anything done, they can't screw things up any more than they already have.
Yep. Or further assert their own agenda and get more power for themselves.
That's it. And the problem that you have right now is that when you can appoint members to the Supreme Court that will carry out your agenda and not be impartial, that is packing the court, really.
Right.
And they did exactly that under Trump, where they rushed through the last appointment after Ginsburg died.
Yep.
And had she held out, and I don't mean to make light of this, but had she held out, because I think she was in a state of coma at the time, and they had just kept her on life support, they couldn't have filled that seat until after the election. And you would have had a more balanced, it still would have been imbalanced, but you would have had a more balanced court at that time. So
yeah.
I think the problem we have is the process by which justices are appointed is now ripe with corruption, and it has become a political process. And I think that the integrity of the Supreme Court has deteriorated to the point that you've got Supreme Court justices now that are under investigation for corruption themselves, where you've got Clarence Thomas, who's under investigation for taking undeclared presents or undeclared gifts, basically bribes,
right,
from a very prominent, very well-known Republican supporter that he was supposed to declare and didn't. And when you've got that kind of suspicion on your Supreme Court, it's really hard to take them seriously as being a Supreme Court at that point.
Yeah, because ideally, at the end of the day, we all know politicians are corrupt, right? I mean, everybody knows that. But ideally, you would want the last line of defense to be the Supreme Court, to be impartial, to be the one thing you can count on to kind of right the ship. But that is not the case anymore, and maybe it hasn't been for a while.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the problem we're at. That's the situation we're in now, where they were always the sanity check. They were always the ones that came in impartially. Not always. I mean, there was partiality in there for years, but they were the element of government that would come in that were the babysitters that would, push the two sides apart and say, all right, let's look at this. Let's look at what's legally precedent. Let's look at what's best for the country, and let's do the right thing. And you're just not getting that referee from them now.
Yep.
So I think we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to take a look at some of the more impactful decisions from the most recent term of the court. We'll be right back.
For over 7 years, the Second Sith Empire has been the premier community guild in the online game Star Wars: The Old Republic. With hundreds of friendly and helpful active members, a weekly schedule of nightly events, annual guild meet and greets, and an active community both on the web and on Discord. The Second Sith Empire is more than your typical gaming group. We're family. Join us on the Starforge server for nightly events such as operations, flashpoints, world boss hunts, Star Wars trivia, guild lottery, and much more. Visit us on the web today at www.thesecondsithempire.com.
Welcome back, everyone, to Insights into Tomorrow. Today we are discussing the Supreme Court and some of their recent decisions. So the first thing we're going to cover is the ruling on affirmative action. The Supreme Court effectively gutted affirmative action, ending race-conscious admissions. In a historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently, like we just said, ended race-conscious admission programs in colleges and universities across the country. In a decision divided along ideological lines, the 6 conservative justices, supermajority, that's a cool word, maybe not in practice, but it's a cool word, invalidated admission programs at Harvard and the University of North Carolina. The decision reverses decades of precedent upheld over the years by narrow Supreme Court majorities that included Republican-appointed justices. It also ends the ability of colleges and universities, public and private, to do what most say they still need to do, and that's consider race as one of the many factors in deciding which of the qualified applicants is to be admitted. So that's the first thing we're covering. This is a pretty big deal, especially for those that are affected by it. And it was really that public and private thing that I really latched onto, that it's everywhere. You think of the big schools like it mentions Harvard and North Carolina, but this is going to affect a lot more than just them.
Yeah, and there's, with all things, there's two sides to every story here. And really what we're looking at here is you've got one side that basically says that you can't, by bringing race in and giving preferential treatment to one race over another is discrimination. So you can't do that. When the point of doing that was because discrimination existed already.
Right.
And you were getting preferential treatment to one race over another. So they legislatively forced you to, if not change that practice, then to at least adhere to certain percentages, certain quotas that you had to have. And the problem that you run into here is that you're saying, okay, let's do it away with discrimination administratively. Well, then in a perfect world, that works. You can do that. But we don't live in a perfect world, because when you do away with administrative discrimination, you still have endemic
Societal
yeah. discrimination that's going to take over in that place.
And that's kind of the thing, that when people argue that, they argue the first point that you said of, oh, well, it's discriminatory to have affirmative action. But then people forget that, like, racism exists. And, like, that's why it had to be, like, forced in the first place, is because if we make it laissez-faire, it doesn't work. It's not equal, and it needs to be mandated to make it well, I guess it's not equal, but you know what I mean, to give those people the opportunity that they otherwise probably would not be afforded and now will not be afforded.
Well, and I think that was what the original point of this legislation was. It was to force you to make it even. But in trying to get to that point, you simply instituted a different form of discrimination. So you're treating a symptom, not the problem. Mm-hmm. The problem really is the discrimination. And until human beings can evolve to the point that they don't discriminate, you're not gonna have that happy balance. And that's kind of what the majority have argued. The 6-3 majority, conservative majority in the court, argued, quote, many universities have for too long concluded, wrongly, that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned, but the color of their skin. Our constitutional history does not tolerate that choice. Now, I take exception to that one to begin with there, because our Constitution declares that all men are created equal. And when it was written, they knew all men weren't created equal, because also in the Constitution, 3/5, every African American who was in the country was counted as 3/5 of a person. So the hypocrisy in the Constitution itself tells me that we don't have a constitutional history that says this is intolerant.
Yeah.
As he has done before, Justice Thomas, the second black justice appointed to the court, reiterated his long-held view that affirmative action imposes a stigma on minorities. Now, this I think he has a point with. I don't think the way he puts it here has a point. He says, quote, while I'm painfully aware of the social and economic ravages which have befallen my race and all who suffer discrimination, I hold our enduring hope that this country will live up to its principles that all men are created equal, all equal citizens, and all must be treated equally before the law. Now, I think he's smart enough to know that that's not how the world is right now.
No,
The fact that he makes a statement like this is naive, and it's insulting, really.
Yeah, because it puts the ball in our court of like, hey, man, we got rid of it. You guys got to be better.
Right.
It's like, no, the Supreme Court exists to do that. It is your job, and more so part than like every citizen, to uphold these values and to fight for this kind of equality that you're talking about here. But you're not doing that. You're doing the opposite of that. And then you're basically washing your hands of it and saying, well, hey, we live in a society. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Now, to Thomas's point, I can understand the rationale that by holding African Americans to a lower standard, that you're imposing a stigma on them. And really, if it was me, I would be insulted. So really what we're talking about here is, if you have two people who are one white, one black, they both apply for school, you have to take, under normal circumstances, you would take the person who's the most qualified, and that qualification would be equally measured. But instead, what we're talking about here is somebody who may need a 3.5 grade point average if they were Caucasian to get in, an African American may only need a 3.25. And Thomas's point is, by holding them to that lower standard, you're basically telling them that they're not good enough. So there's a logic to it, but the way that he uses that logic is so distorted and so tone deaf to the spirit of this legislation, because what's happening is, in reality, reality is saying, if the Caucasian has a 3.5 and the African American has a 3.5, we're going to let the Caucasian guy in because he's not black. And that's what reality is.
Yeah.
And Thomas fails to address that with his stigma argument. So Chief Justice Roberts goes on, and for his part, pointed out the court's 2003 decision reaffirming the constitutionality of affirmative action programs, noting that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, writing for the court at the time, had suggested that there would have to be an end at some point in the future. And Roberts declares that time is now. And I think the problem is, it hasn't. Human beings,
It's only gotten worse.
not even human beings, Americans have not gotten to the point that they're mature enough to assume, to understand that all men are created equal. With the amount of legislation that's happening today that is discriminatory, that is holding African Americans down, that's holding Asian Americans down, the hatred that is an upswelling of political force in this country today is a clear indicator that not only are we not ready, we're not moving in the right direction, we're sliding backwards from where we need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be something we say a lot on this episode. It feels like we're regressing.
Yeah.
And I think it is absurd to assume that the time is now is when we need to end affirmative action. If anything, we might need to go the other way with it to make it more affirmative, right? Because things seem to be only getting worse, and that's going to be a common theme here. We also have the opposing view, and this is from Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She said that the court subverts the constitutional guarantee of equal protection by further entrenching racial inequality in education, the very foundation of our democratic government and pluralistic society. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, the court's first black female justice, also chimed in saying, with Let Them Eat Cake obliviousness today, the majority pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat. Sorry. When you're quoting Supreme Court justices, they're much smarter than I am. But deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life, which is exactly what we just talked about. Just because you say it's that idea of like a post-racial America, right? Like we elected Obama, racism's over. It's like, no, it's not.
Right.
And that is clearly being reflected here as well.
Yeah, no, and the problem that we run into here is that what the majority are arguing here is they're arguing the point of a fiction. That in a perfect world, we shouldn't need this legislation. And they're right. In a perfect world, we shouldn't. The world we live in is far from perfect.
Yeah.
And this happened to be a stopgap measure to make things better. Nothing else has happened in this world to make that situation better. Mm-hmm. If anything, that situation's gotten worse. So by taking away some of the safeties that you had in place to try to provide legal protections for people, you're doing your part. You're being part of the problem, not part of the solution at that point.
Yeah. Why did they do this? just to have a rule? What was the motivation behind it? I don't even like.
Well, the motivation is what motivates conservatives to want to do things like this.
Yeah, I guess just further the agenda, right?
Right. They're pushing an agenda, which they shouldn't be pushing an agenda. They should be looking at each and every case on a standalone basis and making educated, objective decisions. They should not be influenced by party politics, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I wonder if we'd have as harsh criticism if it was the other side. Right, but I also think the liberal agenda or democratic agenda is not as aggressive as the conservative agenda, and not as
which, by its definition, doesn't make sense.
Right,
that your conservatives are the more aggressive,
and that you're supposed to not like big government, right?
Exactly,
and this is the opposite of that. This is the biggest government.
Well, you could argue that this is a limitation of government because it's government making impositions over the schools. And they're saying, well, government shouldn't do that anymore. The schools need to regulate themselves.
I more so meant the 6-3 majority basically being able to do whatever it wants without being stopped.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think
I see what you mean, though.
The motivation that they have at this point in time is, we're a progressive Supreme Court now. We're going to do things right the way that we see it. We're going to make the changes that should have been made years ago, and they're going to undo what's being undone. And there's a couple of problems with that. One, you're undoing existing precedent. So by every time you undo a precedent, like they did in the last session when they overruled Roe versus Wade, every time you overrule a Supreme Court precedent, you delegitimize the Supreme Court.
Nope.
The whole point of the Supreme Court
It's the word. It's final.
is it's supreme.
Right.
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 So when the Supreme Court can override the Supreme Court, then what the Supreme Court today, who's overriding that, says can be overridden.
Who watches the Watchmen? You know.
Right. So they're delegitimizing the Supreme Court. So that's probably one of the biggest problems that you run into. The other problem is the things that haven't been ruled on, that really are important stuff that need to be ruled on, are being pushed to the side so that they can use this agenda that they have to rewrite the rules that have already been written. So you're hurting the country.